Reborn as the Viking pirate king. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 126, Decisive Battle, 1. Meanwhile, Aunt Fafnir gripped her fishing rod, repeating the boring tug of war. Ever since Odin had appointed her the chosen one of Valhalla's fisherman's path, she could cast her rod into the sea and within 3 minutes, a live fish would be hooked. In some ways, it was a more practical skill than the battle path. The 2 ships that had departed from Frostwater Village had long since exhausted their food supplies. These days, fresh water was sourced from the surrounding icebergs, and the food for the 50 people on board depended entirely on Fafnir's single fishing rod. "Free, you old man, you've completely ruined the only joy in my life," Aunt Fafnir said, her hand on her chin, rather boredly. In Asgard, Free governed abundance and hope. The fisherman's path was a divine power bestowed upon the Vikings by Free. Aunt Fafnir's favorite hobby was fishing at the seaside. Back then, she'd happily sit there all afternoon without catching a single fish. Since being promoted to Sequence 9 Sea Dweller on the fisherman path, fishing had gone from a pleasure to a mechanical labor. This made her very unhappy. Even more unhappy was that after just a few days of fishing, her sequence level had actually increased. In just a week, she advanced from Sequence 9 Sea Dweller to Sequence 8 Fish Killer. After fishing for nearly a month, she once again advanced from Fish Killer to Hook Master. The fishing pace was getting faster and faster, but also increasingly boring. Seeing the various seafood caught in the wooden barrel beside her, enough to feed the people of 2 ships, Aunt Fafnir straightened her wooden leg, stood up, and stretched her waist. She put down her fishing rod and picked up the barrel. As she stood up, a low roar suddenly came from the horizon. "What's that sound?" The boatman who was preparing to cook on the 3-masted ship ran out of the kitchen. Aunt Fafnir narrowed her eyes and looked at the dark horizon. The intuition of the chosen one made her smell a hint of danger. The sound of ice breaking came to her ears. Fafnir dropped the barrel and quickly walked to the bow. What she saw was the frozen sea, over 10 meters thick, cracking piece by piece. The once mirror-smooth frozen landmass shattered into dozens of ice blocks of varying sizes, sinking to the bottom of the sea, leaving the smooth sea surface once again covered by the sea. Oh my God! How are the village chief and his companions going to get back? As this question flashed through Fafnir's mind, a ball of yellow lightning appeared on the gloomy horizon. It moved at an incredible speed, transforming into the shape of a giant bird as it drew closer. Even more astonishingly, this bird was pulling a ship at breakneck speed across the ice-strewn sea. Riding the wind and waves, the ship cut through the ice at an incredible speed, hurtling towards them. Behind them, a black mountain slowly rose from beneath the sea surface. Meanwhile, an even more agonized roar pierced the endless mountain peaks. Looking closely, Fafnir seemed to see a huge head rising from under the sea, its mouth wide open, spitting out blood, smoke and flames. "Quick! Fold the anchor, hang the sail, and use this gust of wind. Start the boat first," Fafnir roared, and the Viking pirates around her obeyed the order and took action immediately. As the head chef of the canteen in Hanshu village, she already had a high prestige. Now she was promoted to the chosen one. When Loki was not on board, she was the highest-ranking officer on the 2 ships. Aim the stern at the unknown size of the underwater monster in the distance. Be careful, the huge wave is coming. Any creature that emerges from the water will create ripples on the water surface. And when the creature is as large as the Leviathan, the weak ripples will be magnified 100 times, forming huge waves of nearly 100 meters. When a wave of this size comes, it can easily knock the ship off the water. The experience summed up by countless Viking predecessors who were buried at the bottom of the sea is that in the face of this situation, mortals have only one solution: run. The farther the boat runs, the better, and wait for the power of the waves to weaken on their own. The big bird flying at high speed became bigger and bigger in Fafnir's sight, and the ship it was pulling was also approaching her direction at a rapid speed. When it reached the vicinity of the 3-masted ship, the big bird with an arm span of 100 meters turned back into human form and stood at the highest point of the mast, and a familiar voice came from the strange ship. "Aunt Fafnir, are you all okay, village chief?" "Praise Odin, the village chief is still alive." The Viking pirates clapped their hands in celebration. Before they could exchange any more pleasantries, a rope was thrown from the leechy under Loki's feet. "I need 10 people to start this ship. Climb over here." 10 people, and were ready to return. When Loki was about to escape with only 3 ships under his command, Fenghuse, who was standing on the mast, floated down lightly and stood in front of Loki. "Young man, my promise has been fulfilled, what about yours?" The Viking pirates of Hanshu village were slowly raising the sails to escape. Loki stood in front of Fenghuse, looking into his eyes, and asked seriously, "Senior, isn't it good to be alive?" Fenghuse's eyes were sparkling. He knew that Loki didn't have any malicious intentions when he asked this question. Looking up at the slowly rising mountains in the distance, he said in a deep voice, "I must complete this matter, Yugong. This is the task assigned to me by the king. Although it was completed a little late, there has never been a coward among us Kin-Ki cultivators who flee in the face of danger. Personally, 2 sword cultivators in my team went crazy and committed suicide, and my Taoist partner died from a blood mosquito. If I don't kill this beast, I won't be able to face my former teammates after I die." "But Qin Shi Huang has been dead for nearly 1,000 years, Loki said. "Haha, the king will die?" Fenghuse laughed dryly, as if he heard a joke. "I can still survive for 1,000 years in the intestines of a giant beast. The king's power is 10,000 times stronger than mine. How could he die after living in the mortal world for only a few decades? If the king is dead, it's just because he wants you to think he's dead." Sighing deeply, Loki could only ask again, "Are you really ready?" Fenghuse nodded lightly. In order to wait for this day, he endured the living environment that ordinary people could not endure for a moment for 1,000 years. When the opportunity came, he never thought of giving up. Okay. To be honest, the one who most hopes that Fenghuse can kill Leviathan is Loki himself. The reason is simple. The Arctic Circle is too close to the Scandinavian peninsula. The living sacrifices are now neatly placed on the reefs and the sea. When this giant beast wakes up and smells the temperature, it will slowly move to between the Scandinavian peninsula and Greenland. If this thing intends to crawl to the Scandinavian peninsula for a circle, unless Odin and Thor and Valhalla all show up, all the Vikings will be buried with it. No one is allowed to sleep soundly next to the bed, especially this horrible monster from billions of years ago. Thinking that this thing may rampage throughout the entire Nordic region, Loki no longer hesitated. He stretched out his hand to greet Yum. The sun sacrifice received his thoughts and immediately understood what he meant. Yum stood at the bow, took a deep breath, then opened his mouth and let out a deep, muffled blast like a cruise ship's whistle. Hearing his cry, all the other sacrifices arranged along the sacrificial road simultaneously let out low-pitched roars. The sound pierced the Arctic night, reaching the Leviathan's ears with pinpoint accuracy. The beast, throbbing with excruciating abdominal pain, spat blood as it slowly turned its gaze toward Yum. Standing behind him, Loki immediately sensed a chilling murderous intent. By then, the Leviathan had already plucked all 6 of its short legs from the seabed. A pair of cold eyes on its massive head furnace locked onto Yum. It smelled the scent of food and psychic energy emanating from him. Waves thousands of meters high rose again, and the beast was pouncing head-on. Chapter 127, Decisive Battle, 2. Loki clearly remembered a story Jerome had told him while examining Xiaolu's notebook in Hanshu village. Shortly after the advent of the Holy Lord Christ, Leviathan attempted to climb onto the land of the western continent, Europe, but was driven back into the sea by the Holy Lord Christ. It was from this story that the word Leviathan became the name of this behemoth in the Western world. This story suggests that the Old One's inherent power may not be very strong. As a new god, the Holy Lord Christ has only existed for nearly 800 years. Of the 5 levels he inherited, war, law, faith, justice, and holy light, only war and justice are related to combat. In other words, this deity was not known for its military prowess. Yet, even with his strength, he was able to drive the Leviathan, which had attempted to climb onto land, back into the sea. This story suggests that Fenghuse, a Dalojingson, is not completely without a chance. Secondly, within the Black Pyramid beneath its shell, Loki learned of its history through murals and discovered that its entire 200 million year existence revolved around one single principle: survival. After birth, it was bullied by powerful dinosaurs, forcing it to survive by eating garbage. Later, It was picked up by a light giant. "You can bully me as much as you want, I can't defeat you, so I'll just accept it. Survival is all that matters." Later, the light giant grew bored and created the lizardmen. The battle between the lizardmen and Leviathan was akin to a swarm of ants battling a rock. When Leviathan felt energetic, it would awaken and stroll around with them. When it felt weak, it would sleep for 1,000 years, allowing them to slowly figure out how to overcome its tough outer shell. Eventually, even the lizardmen grew tired of the fighting and chose a leader to mediate. The two factions then united and escaped, like a dog riding a rabbit. Finding a secluded corner, they continued to do what Leviathan excels at, survival. 200 million years of survival made it a unique master of survival. Putting aside other things, just this ability to absorb heat from the surrounding environment to sustain life, no creature on Earth can do it. So much so that its battle method involves swallowing its enemies and slowly torturing them, using its seemingly endless lifespan and impenetrable shell to form a cage, exhausting them to death. Based on these observations, Loki felt that while this beast might be enormous, its true strength might not be formidable. On the other hand, Feng-Huzi hadn't interrupted his training even after being trapped for millennia. His full potential hadn't yet been fully revealed. Leviathan was rapidly advancing along the path of the sacrificial offerings. Spitting blood, it plunged its massive head into the water, biting down a piece of ice and devouring it with a crunching sound. A faint, muffled roar emanated from the ice, the sacrificial offering frozen beneath the frozen sea. After crunching through the large chunk of ice, the small head atop Leviathan's massive body, though still spewing blood, had significantly improved its spirits and moved at a faster pace. Following the howling sound, his massive body dove headfirst towards the second living sacrifice dangling from the reef. Given its size, it wouldn't take long for it to complete the entire sacrificial path. Loki's 3 ships had already hoisted their sails. The massive monster had caused a fierce gale to rage on the sea, accompanied by massive waves. All the Vikings aboard the 3 ships retreated to the lower decks, took up their oars, and paddled furiously. Although the ships were advancing at a rapid pace, Loki could only clasp his hands together and pray to the Holy Lord in heaven, "Don't let me perish at sea at this moment, I just found the Imperial Seal. Let's not even talk about its value, it's more than enough to exchange for a few cities from the Tang people. Furthermore, I also have a stone sword that strongly resembles the Xuan Yuan sword. If I can safely return to the coast of Scandinavia, I'll become one of the richest men in the world." However, even at full speed, the 3 sailing ships were still far too slow compared to the Leviathan. Watching the behemoth transform from a line on the horizon to a low mountain, now nearly dominating the entire horizon, a mortal could do nothing at such a moment except pray. Feng-Huzi stood proudly in midair, gently flapping his massive wings. Thick orange-yellow lightning bolts continuously rained down from the dark clouds, converging on his body, causing his feathers to become increasingly condensed. Stimulated by the lightning bolts between heaven and earth, his soft feathers gradually condensed, no longer fluffy like bird feathers, but as radiant and brilliant as steel. East, Jia and Yi wood; south, Bing and Ding fire; center, wood, earth; west, Zheng and Xin metal. Hovering in midair, Feng-Huzi softly chanted an ancient incantation that did not belong to this era. Preek and Kagan practitioners cast spells without dazzling lights or spell runes. All Loki could sense was that the air around him seemed to swirl in a continuous vortex centered around him. This incantation likely involved his uncanny ability to draw all the free elements of heaven and earth into his body. Lightning crackled. Once Feng-Huzi had accumulated the necessary energy, he soared towards Leviathan and launched his first mid-air attack. Feng-Huzi transformed into golden winged rock, his wingspan reaching 100 meters, yet even this size was dwarfed by Leviathan, as tiny as a speck of dust. A thick bolt of lightning struck, but Leviathan ignored him and continued crawling along the path of sacrifices. All he could see were the evenly arranged sacrifices, nothing else. Finding his mid-air lightning ineffective against Leviathan, Feng-Huzi decided to change his strategy. He charged at the 2 mountain-sized eyes atop Leviathan's triangular head. But Leviathan had survived for 200 million years, how could it not understand Feng-Huzi's purpose? He gently closed his eyes, his thick eyelids lowering to form 2 screens. The beast could still follow the cries of the sacrifices and continue its advance. Loki glanced behind him with a worried look on his face. He noticed that the Leviathan had expanded from an entire horizon to half the sky, now nearly obscuring the sun. The sheer size of the beast brought a tremendous sense of oppression to him. He had ultimately underestimated the speed of this 500-kilometer-wide beast crawling through the ocean. Something had to be done, or else this thing would crash into all the ships. If we fall into the sea in the Arctic Circle, we'll all die. Loki instinctively drew his bloody axe, but as he turned back, he saw Yum standing behind him. Chapter 128, Decisive Battle, 3. Yum hadn't been happy these past few days. The 10-year-old's heart was consumed with thoughts about the sled dogs they had forgotten on the Leviathan's shell. A child's heart was pure. He didn't understand the pointless bickering of adults, nor could he comprehend why Loki would risk his life to enter the Black Pyramid and retrieve what he considered to be useless nuggets of gold. Even with his mind-reading powers, he couldn't comprehend. He only knew that his good friends, those 5 loyal sled dogs, were forever forgotten on the back of the Leviathan. He would never see them again. And now, he could once again read what Loki was about to do. Though they had only known each other for a short time, Loki was a good man who cared deeply for him. Yum could sense that. He didn't want to lose his elder brother again. So, when he stood before Loki, he drew the knife Loki had given him and, without hesitation, slit his left-hand artery. Yum. You? Loki was filled with shock and fury. He opened his mouth to yell, but the boy thrust his cut wrist directly into Loki's mouth. Gulp, gulp, and Loki immediately felt a sweet aroma in his mouth. What was this? How could it be so sweet? In the cave, when the Gorgon slashed Yum's arm, a drop of golden blood appeared. The sight of that drop of blood nearly drove the Gorgon into a frenzy. It was at this moment that it was exposed, and old Gore shoved it against the wall and pierced its skull. Damn it! I'm still human, how could I do such a thing? Using almost all his strength and all his rationality, Loki finally pulled Yum's wrist from his mouth. By then, the boy's lips had turned pale, and even his skin looked slightly dry and old. Brother, eat me. Otherwise, you can't defeat him, Yum said weakly, but Loki delivered a heavy slap to his face. Are you a fucking idiot? Our lives are lives, but yours isn't. I just can't stand your cowardly attitude. You could kill us all with just your little finger, so why sacrifice yourself? When danger struck, you could have just abandoned us all and jumped overboard. Why didn't you? You're a man. Despite the scolding, Loki walked over to him, immediately stripping off his clothes and bandaging his wounds. He called for the Bishop of Light, Lawrence, grabbing him by the collar and urging him to save Yum's life at all costs. He could feel his heart pounding furiously, every vein in his body throbbing with strain. Loki was truly furious. Drawing his axe, he roared wildly at Leviathan, then without hesitation, plunged into the sea. Boom, boom, boom. His violently beating heart fueled him with nearly limitless power. He felt a blood-red swirl before his eyes. Even in the icy waters, he still possessed the might of the blood mist illusion. Damn it! Regardless of traps, Feng Huzi's survival, or the village chief's, today, I must chop this thing down with my own hands. Right now, I just want to kill. He climbed onto Leviathan's body using both hands and feet, the icy water not even chilling him. His heart continued to beat furiously, and at the same time, a rich psychic energy accumulated within him, making him feel as if he would explode at any moment. Ah! It's hot. So damn hot. Loki roared again, like a beast. He raised his left hand high to the sky, and the complex magic circle at its center illuminated. With a casual wave of his hand, he actually summoned a red portal. From within, a thick red mist billowed out. 6 Viking warriors, clad in pitch black, emerged from the portal. They were the survivors of the victory over the hermit crab within Loki's sea of consciousness. Is this my fallen titan? With his bloodshot eyes, Loki had no time to ponder the question. Summoning the portal only slightly alleviated his urge to explode, but the overabundant psychic energy within him continued to rage. Placing his feet on one of Leviathan's claws, he leaped with all his might, leaping 1,000 meters high and soaring directly towards Leviathan's head. Haha, I'm going to destroy everything. I'm going to smash his head, pop his eyeballs, penetrate his brain, and pulverize it into pulp. Incredible. Really incredible. In a few leaps, he'd covered over 10 kilometers and was standing before Leviathan's eyelids. He raised his axe and struck down, the bloody axe, infused with abundant psychic energy, cleanly cleaving off a chunk of the stone-like crust. The fallen titan summoned from the portal followed closely behind him. These Viking warriors, emanating from Loki's sea of consciousness and transformed by the bloody creator, could perfectly receive every thought in his mind. Like a raging swarm of machines, they brandished their weapons at a breakneck pace, simultaneously beginning their excavation. Chop! Chop them all! Loki and his companions' arms transformed into phantoms. The golden blood of the sun sacrifice, the body of the bloody creator, the rank of the crimson apostle, and the boiling blood of the Sterrig family, all of his bloodlines blended perfectly into a violent explosion, a complete state of unconsciousness. His burning heart pumped the scalding blood through his body. He knew only the mechanical contraction of his muscles, swinging his arms, slashing through everything before him. Leviathan had survived for 200 million years and faced danger countless times, but never before had it suffered such repeated and devastating blows in a single day as today. The exploding methane within his body destroyed all the blood mosquitoes within his abdomen. The Cyclops, who inhabited the dungeon, emerged from their shells, attempting to disrupt Loki's excavation with their spears. But as soon as they emerged, they were shattered by a thunderbolt that rained down from the sky. Suspended in midair, the wind swan, now fully restored to its full power, was no match for these ordinary monsters. Cleansed by the lightning, only a scorched corpse remained on its shell. They didn't even get a hair off the wind swan. At this moment, Leviathan finally felt the threat of death. Having survived for so many years, this was the first time it faced such a predicament. All the blood mosquitoes in its body had died, and the monsters on its back were useless. This situation was almost hopeless for it. After a brief moment of hesitation, the massive beast finally decided to turn around, abandon the path of the living sacrifice, and escape the crazed humans before it as quickly as possible. But Loki, completely out of control after drinking the golden blood, had no intention of letting it go. We're open for the new year, and we wish all our readers a happy new year. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129, Decisive Battle, 4. Gu Changking had mentioned that the demon's sealing blade, imbued with abundant psychic energy, was practically indestructible. Loki now firmly believed this. In just over 10 minutes, he and the 6 fallen titans at his side had ripped a gaping hole through Leviathan's tightly closed eyelids. Its eyelids were nowhere near as thick as teeth, measuring only a few dozen meters across, otherwise, they wouldn't be easily folded. Over hundreds of millions of years of evolution, the key characteristic of these eyelids was their hardness. But that very word proved utterly ineffective against the lineage of the bloody creator. Loki's eyes flashed red as he swung his arms rapidly. He and the fallen titans dug faster and faster, feeling the temperature of the cave before them grow hotter. Leviathan's eyeball lay on the other side of this thin stone wall. Haha, I'm going to smash your eyeballs, charge into your skull, and mince your brain. Leviathan couldn't defend itself against a foe leaping upon its head. Its 6 sturdy, short legs were too short to defend large areas of its body like human arms. During the long years of symbiosis, this task was handled by the Cyclops, skilled in ranged attacks, on its back. But now, with Feng Huzi's assistance, no Cyclops could survive on the turtle's back. In despair, Leviathan chose the ultimate survival strategy, shutting its eyes and plunging into the sea. As icy water poured in from behind, Loki clung to the rocks in the cavern. Even so, the surging waters still overwhelmed him, nearly overwhelming him. As Leviathan dove deeper and deeper, after struggling for several minutes, Loki finally lost his grip, leaving the monster far behind. 200 million years of evolution had endowed him with exceptional swimming speed. During several crucial global disasters, he survived by digging through the seabed's mud and burying himself beneath it. Under the constant stimulation of the icy water, Loki finally regained consciousness. Floating in the ocean, he watched the giant creature swiftly retreat, realizing that he was powerless. After all, this was a creature that had survived for 200 million years. Loki doubted he hadn't devised some escape tricks. Well, escaping to the bottom of the ocean isn't a bad option. After all, this thing slept for 1,000 years, and by the time it awakens again, humanity will have nuclear weapons. This deadly battle at least relieves Scandinavia's pressing needs. Odin, old man, remember, you owe me a big favor. Loki was just about to swim back to the surface when things took another turn. Leviathan, terrified, closed his eyes and paddled desperately. Despite all his calculations, he hadn't imagined he'd plunge headfirst into a trap set by Xiaolu 50 years ago. It was an extremely well-concealed trap. From the dream Yam had conveyed to him, Xiaolu's fleet had thrown many objects resembling transparent glass into the sea when setting it up. It was foreseeable that another group was setting up this trap underwater. The translucent glass was hidden in the water, making it completely undetectable. As Leviathan dove into the trap, a muffled thunder echoed simultaneously from the ground and above. The transparent glass surrounding the Leviathan, absorbing the lightning's energy, exploded into dazzling ball-of sparks, completely enveloping its massive head. This was an immense burst of energy. The violent lightning emitted a muffled thud beneath the water, like a short circuit. Leviathan, Loki, the fallen titan, and all the fish in the nearby waters were struck by the lightning, drifting limply back to the surface. The 10,000 thunder demon ceiling formation Xiaolu had mentioned was actually an electric shock trap. This practice, 1,000 years later in the 21st century, became known as electrofishing. Electrofishing involves fishermen using a high-powered electrical device to stun all the fish in the pond, large and small, and even fry. The stunned fish then float to the surface and fall into a brief coma. On reflection, this seems like the best way to combat a creature like the Leviathan. Humans are dwarfed by the Leviathan, but this behemoth is nothing compared to the vast ocean. What if there were a way to instantly unleash a massive amount of electrical energy across an entire ocean? Even a being as massive as the Leviathan would be stunned instantly. This is because the electric current attacks neurons throughout the organism, and the neural center is in the brain. Thousands of years ago, the ancient people of China, harassed and tempered by the alien gods, unexpectedly cultivated such remarkable wisdom. Loki was also struck by the electric shock, his limbs stiff and unable to move. The massive Leviathan emerged from the seabed, and it was as if a huge island had appeared out of thin air on the vast ocean. Under the electric shock, it could no longer keep its eyelids closed. When those two enormous pupils appeared, Feng Huzi in the sky launched another attack. A ball of yellow lightning streaked across the sky like a meteor, and Feng Huzi, with unbridled laughter, plunged headfirst into the Leviathan's eyeballs. In the excited laughter that resounded through the sky, Lu Ji could hear 3 parts of satisfaction, 5 parts of joy, and 2 parts of the arrogance of a pre-kin Kigan cultivator. My dear friends, it's my honor to have met you and fought alongside you. This demon beast's vitality is truly too powerful. And the changes in the outside world are beyond the reach of an old man like me. I will detonate my nascent soul and immortal body to complete the mission entrusted to me by the first emperor. Key cultivators in the pre-kin period never managed to escape in a humiliating manner. Today is the day I avenge my teammates and my Taoist companions. Feng Huzi has gone first. These 3 words came from the distant horizon. Loki floated on the sea, eager to see what Feng Huzi was doing, but after experiencing a powerful electric shock in the water, not a single cell in his body could move freely. With his neck stiff and facing the sky, he watched as the deep darkness suddenly illuminated with blazing lightning. A dull explosion, accompanied by a pungent smell of burnt hair, wafted across the sea. Leviathan let out a high-pitched howl, and then fell silent. Soon, the raging sea returned to calm. Leviathan floated motionless on the sea. Its body slowly sank, and when it touched the seabed, it became a new island. Lifeless, its shell, supported by the strange tree, could no longer bear the immense weight, and with a resounding roar, it shattered and collapsed. The underground city hidden beneath its thick shell vanished forever from human sight. Over half an hour later, Aunt Fafnir and her fleet retrieved Loki from the sea. It took him a full day to recover from the numbness of the electric shock. Using all his strength, Loki lifted himself from his bunk, walked to the side, and gazed into the horizon, catching sight of a nearly new continent. Sure enough, this was the location of the future Iceland. He had, by some strange twist of fate, created an island that didn't exist in this plane. Shaking his head slightly, Loki couldn't quite describe the dreamlike feeling he felt. He stood in the cold wind for a moment, tightening his collar. Returning to the cabin, he noticed his damp leather jacket lying beside his bed. After rummaging around in his arms, he pulled out the imperial seal that had been hidden in his leather jacket pocket. After weighing it twice, he put it away solemnly and took out the seal of blood sacrifice given to him by Feng Huzi from another pocket. On the desk in the bedroom were neatly arranged Xiaolu's notebook, his own blood axe, and the biggest gain of this trip, the stone sword that was stuck in the center of the 12 lizardmen statues and seriously suspected to be the Zuinun sword. Yam faithfully carried out his wishes and carried the sword on his back the whole time. Although these trophies cannot be exchanged for silver coins, After this trip, Loki felt that he seemed to have grown greatly in these short 20 days. Haha, Loki laughed dryly in a hoarse voice and spit out more a broken tooth from his mouth. Yang Fan, let's go home. Note, electric fishing is strictly prohibited in our country. It is an act that destroys the ecological balance. Chapter 130 Homecoming, 1. The night sky was clear, cloudless. Loki's 2 tower ships and a 3-masted ship had already sailed beyond the Arctic Circle and arrived in the Norwegian Sea, not far from their homeland. The leader and his crew had all returned safely to their ships, having even given away another Chinese tower ship, the Lychee. The Vikings, ship-loving as they were thrilled. There were no sailing missions tonight. Loki ordered the ships to anchor in calm waters to allow the crew a day's rest and a good meal, so they could depart home early the next morning. The Viking crew drank tea stored in the tower ships and carefully examined the telescopes, compasses, and silver coins that old Valder had salvaged from the various tower ships. This was an ancient Viking custom. Those who ventured forth must give a share of the spoils to the guards remaining aboard. Although Zaiolu's fleet didn't possess the vast treasures of gold and silver hidden within the Lindisfarne monastery, Old Gar had thoroughly raided the 8 tower ships, recovering 60 gold pounds and approximately 300 silver coins. This fortune was distributed among the 50 or so Vikings remaining on the ship, each taking home a substantial sum. While they wouldn't be able to afford luxury, it was more than enough to upgrade their own Gahan, craft a new set of armor, and buy a few livestock for their families. The biggest winner was none other than Old Gar. His face flushed as he first pulled out the massive dog-headed human scepter, then removed the scorpion bracers from his wrists. Finally, he pulled out a heavy, multicolored mask from his bosom. All 3 trophies had been taken from the Black Pyramid, from the mountain of gold on the Egyptian plate. Ha-ho. Look at them all. Old Gar grabbed a flask of strong liquor and gulped it down. The fine tang brew liquor, poured into his mouth, sounded indistinguishable from cheap ale. With a flushed face, he leaped onto the table with a thud, eyes wide open, and began boasting to everyone around him. This trip has really broadened my horizons. Oh, you didn't see the pyramid inside that monster. That's over a dozen mountains of gold. Old Gar has never seen anything like this in my life. There are so many gold coins there that they could bury Hanshu village. My dad taught me, when it comes to silver, take the biggest and heaviest ones. Hey, I just scraped these few things off that mountain of gold. You ask why I only took so little? Haha. Try lifting it. Do you really think gold is scrap metal? The 2 Viking warriors beside him reached out to grab the dog-headed human staff and found it surprisingly heavy. Old Gar was smug, and it was no wonder they were so proud of themselves. Most Vikings had never seen a single piece of gold in their lives, let alone a staff made of pure gold. Everyone looked at Old Gar with envy. The gold was certainly one thing, but the pirates were even more envious of his adventures over the past few days. While others have taken over the land, our leader, Loki, has created an island. In this adventurous age without television, internet, or even radio, even a bard couldn't have invented such a thrilling adventure. Cheers to our great leader, Loki. Cheers. Gulps of the rich, tang-brewed wine were far more potent than the Vikings' usual ale. Before long, everyone was tippled. Several capable men brought out wooden crates filled with silver coins. Each brother received 6 silver coins and a gold pound. With the remaining 10 or so gold pounds and 3 silver swords, Old Gar planned to use the most ancient Viking skill, wrestling, to determine the victor. 10 minutes later. Anyone still standing on the floor gets paid. Those unfortunate enough to lie down, haha, we'll see next time. Let the battle begin. Old Gar emptied his bottle of liquor, leaped off the table with a thud, and slammed his fist into the cheek of his teammate. Bang, 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 a fist-fighting melee, mingled with laughter, began. Deep down in the cabin, Loki heard the clamor overhead and shook his head in frustration. Fist-fighting was a Viking tradition. They didn't see themselves as assaulting their friends, but rather as a spectacular performance for the gods in Valhalla. The more ferocious the fight, the happier the gods were, and the happier both sides felt. Damn it, it started again. Let's just ignore it and get back to cooking. Loki was in the kitchen, teaching Aunt Valruna a new culinary skill. He grabbed a handful of shiny powder and held it up to her. Sister, this is called cane sugar. In the Middle Ages, there was no such thing as white sugar. The only way to make sugar was to squeeze the juice from sugar cane and beets, boiling it in large cauldrons until it became thick or crystallized. During the boiling process, the sugar inevitably coloring and scorching due to the heat. Therefore, traditionally made brown sugar is mostly dark in color and has a faint, burnt aroma. Even this type of sugar was a rare luxury in the Middle Ages. Approximately 100 kilograms of sugar cane could produce 3 kilograms of traditional brown sugar. Perhaps only the Tang people in the world could bring this commodity to the tables of ordinary people. Therefore, only the wealthy Tang people could invent such an extremely luxurious cooking method as red stew. Heat the oil and sugar together. Once the brown sugar melts, we can add the fish. With this, Loki tossed several large fish into the pot. With a loud sizzling sound, the scorching oil mixture began to vibrate violently, and Aunt Fafnir took an uncontrollable step back. Seeing this, Loki recalled his first cooking experience in his previous life. "It's okay, old sister. Chef Mao is afraid of overheating, so just cook it a few more times." There was no onion or ginger in the boat, so he poured in a little white wine. A fiery flame began to rise in the pot. After covering the pot to extinguish the flames, Loki poured in the soy sauce that had been frozen in the ship for 50 years. The aroma of braised fish began to fill the room. It was a fragrance the Vikings had never smelled before. This fragrance was called civilization. The hard work is all done. Now just add water and simmer it like we usually cook fish. When the broth is almost dry, we can serve it. Next, you'll make the rice. I taught you yesterday, so you should remember it by now. Right, I remember it, but what? If you're worried it'll burn, just turn down the heat. We all don't know how to make this at first, but we'll get it after a few tries. After finishing his work in the kitchen, Loki washed his hands in a basin of clean water and walked out of the room to the warehouse nearby. This was originally a storage area for bacon and firewood on the three-masted ship. Now, Loki had cleared it out and turned it into a cozy cabin. It was the most comfortable cabin on the three-masted ship. Yum had been lying in it for the past few days. Chapter 131 Homecoming, 2. Reaching out and touching Yum's forehead, Loki finally felt a weight lifted from his chest. During the battle with Leviathan, he had slit his wrist and let Loki drink his golden divine blood. Caught off guard, Loki gulped down 2 mouthfuls. But those few hundred milliliters of blood instantly aged the 12-year-old. Those 2 gulps of golden blood sent Loki into a frenzy. If Leviathan hadn't, in his panic, triggered a trap left by Xiaolu, shocking Loki as well, he didn't know how long his madness would have lasted. His blood held a power far beyond psychic energy, a far more terrifying energy. The touch of his palm confirmed that Yum's fever was at least gone. Emma, who sat by his bed, made room for Loki. Ever since discovering Yum, she seemed to have taken a deep affection for him, which was understandable. She had spent most of her escape resting on Yum's back. Without Yamu, Emma would never have escaped from the Leviathan. "How is he?" Loki asked Lawrence Nightingale, the Bishop of Light, who was on the other side of the bed. He had carried a massive cross throughout this journey, trudging across the frozen ocean. He had endured the most, but in the end, he had also benefited the most. Lawrence's appearance now differed markedly from that of ordinary men. His appearance was remarkably clean, his pristine white monk's robes never a speck of dust or stain, no matter where he was. Furthermore, if one focused intently, a white holy light circle would occasionally appear behind his head, giving him a solemn and mysterious air. I recite the gospel of blessing for him daily, nourishing his soul with holy light, and he's feeling much better now. Hearing Lawrence speak, Yamu slowly opened his eyes. His once smooth, youthful skin was now wrinkled, and the 12-year-old looked like a 40-year-old. It wasn't a good thing, but at least he hadn't lost his life. "You two, go out first. I want to speak to him privately." Loki dismissed Lawrence and Emma from the room, then pulled over a chair and solemnly sat down next to Yum. "During the battle with the Leviathan, I slapped you in a fit of impatience. I want to apologize first." Loki's eyes were frank. He knew Yum was acting in his own good, but he couldn't accept such behavior. Yum's eyes evaded him, unsure how to respond. In his opinion, if Loki hadn't drunk his blood and instead fought the Leviathan, he would have been courting death. He couldn't understand why his brother had lost his temper, because he didn't know that humans outside the Americas didn't practice cannibalism. "Now, I have 2 crucial questions for you. First, do you have the ability to devour mysterious creatures like outer gods and old gods to gain power?" Yum nodded. "Besides that, can you swim?" Yum nodded again. Loki had been observing Yum's condition for the past few days, and he was worried. His intuition told him that rescuing his Sequence 2 son's sacrifice wasn't something Lawrence's holy light spells could accomplish. He needed to utilize the most ancient way of America's chosen, feeding. Bringing Yalm to the side of the ship, Loki pointed to the corpse of Leviathan not far away and said, "This thing died not long ago. Although it's now soaking in the sea, I have a hunch its body should still be fresh by now. Yalm, this isn't easy, but to save yourself, I demand it. You must swim thousands of meters to the bottom of the ocean, locate Leviathan's head, enter its brain through its eye sockets, and consume every edible part of it." While this might sound alarming to an ordinary person, Yalm wasn't surprised at all. He nodded and made a move to leap overboard. But then Loki grabbed his shoulder again and gave him further instructions. "This great old one will elevate your body to new heights. You might even be able to break through Sequence 2 and become Sequence 1, a true god. I won't wait for you here." Loki said this with great difficulty, but he had to. First, he had seen how Emma had treated him these past few days. This mad scientist had practically treated him like a human projector. Even when his body hadn't fully recovered, she kept asking him to perform a spell that felt like a time travel movie, allowing her to see the tomes within the obsidian pyramid. Loki could sense that the constant use of his magical powers was extremely uncomfortable for Yamu. But the kind-hearted young man silently endured it without a single complaint. Loki saw this and felt a pang of discomfort. In a week, they would return to the Conqueror's fortress, home to the Viking king Saber-Tooth O'Sullivan. By then, the frail Emma would have transformed into the most powerful figure in her fleet. If she asked to take Yamu back to Constantinople, he, a minor noble, would have no room for negotiation. It was hard to imagine the miserable life that a Sequence 2 living sacrifice like Yalm would face upon returning to the Royal Academy. Which of the famous lab rats in history hadn't suffered a fate worse than death, ultimately collapsing and committing suicide? He wouldn't allow that to happen, no matter what. Even if he completely turned against the O'Sullivan family and kept Yalm by his side, would that young man be able to live a happy life? To this day, Loki couldn't forget that sweet golden blood, and the raging power he gained after drinking it. It was a power powerful enough to slay gods. Even facing a powerful old one, Loki, having drunk the golden blood, would be as ruthless as an ant trying to shake a tree, unsheathing his axe to fight. If he kept Yalm by his side, putting aside his ability to care for a 12-year-old, even if he had the time, if he faced a powerful enemy again and his own strength proved insufficient, he would surely target Yalm. This innocent, pitiful child would sooner or later be murdered by him. Loki couldn't allow that to happen either. For these two reasons, Yalm had to leave him. There was no other choice. Standing across from him, Yalm accurately received Loki's thoughts. He could sense that this elder brother was a good man. During their adventures together, they had been in danger many times, but this elder brother had always cared for his safety. Even now, he asked him to leave for his own future safety. Ruffling his hair habitually, Loki reached into his bosom and pulled out a waterproof parchment scroll. He had already roughly mapped out a map from his memory. The route from Iceland back to Yalm's homeland in South America was actually much less complicated than imagined. While the word swim back sounded terrifying, if you really thought about it, the distance he had to swim wasn't that long. He only needed to cross the Denmark Strait to Greenland, then cross the Davis Strait to enter Canada 1,000 years from now. From there, he simply had to head south to return to his warm and humid homeland. For a mortal, this journey would be quite long. But for a demigod like Yamu, whose physique rivaled that of a Tyrannosaurus rex, even circumnavigating the globe wouldn't be a problem. Go quickly, while you're still fresh. Parting is always a sad experience. Loki gently wiped away the tears from the boy's eyes and continued, "You're a grown-up now, stop crying all the time. In a few years, I'll lead a fleet to visit you in America, don't I? When I finally set foot on that land, I'll tear down your pyramids to find you, brother. I will definitely stay alive," Yamu replied earnestly. He peeled off his leather jacket, revealing the stairway to the sun tattoo on his back. He cast one last glance at Loki in the windless night, then plunged into the vast ocean with a splash. Loki wasn't worried about him drowning. His demigod form aside, he was likely safe. Even if he did drown, it would be a far more merciful outcome than for this kind and innocent boy to enter human society with such a naive look on his face. Chapter 132 Homecoming, 3. An hour later, As a group of bruised Vikings supported each other as they made their way to the cabin to collect food, Emma searched the entire ship and finally discovered that Yam was missing. "Where's Yam?" she anxiously asked Loki. "Oh, he jumped into the sea," Loki replied calmly, taking a piece of fish into his mouth. The rich, red braised flavor tantalized his taste buds, a memory from the past life. The familiar flavor reminded him of his family from his past life. Jump into the sea. How could you allow him to do such a thing? The water is so cold. Where else could he swim to in this desolate sea besides our 3 ships? His wounds haven't healed yet. Emma shouted the last part, almost hoarse. She had always treated Loki with the utmost respect throughout the journey, but this was the first time she had yelled at him. Loki rolled his eyes and looked at Emma. In moments of extreme anger, people often speak their truest thoughts. He was deeply surprised to find Emma caring more about Yam's health than the image in his mind. This made him look up to the girl. "I had intended to take him back to Constantinople, to give him a proper education at our Royal Academy, to study while recuperating, away from all this violence. I never imagined you'd let him jump into the sea and swim away. Don't you care a bit about his life or death?" Loki chuckled scornfully, continuing to stuff his food. "My dear lady, we're pirates, not bandits. He's got legs, and he said he hasn't been home in over 50 years and wants to go back. What can I do? Is tying him up a rope the civilized way people do things? Even if you look at Yam's abilities, you've seen how he can be tied up. You're a bunch of lunatics." Emma blushed, feeling surrounded by a bunch of unreasonable weirdos. "I simply can't communicate with you, Viking freaks who would fight each other for a few gold coins, then become like family afterward. The Bishop of Light, who could unleash miracles of holy light but willingly mingled with murderers, and this captain who was sometimes crazy, sometimes sane, sometimes a bit crazy." The girl snorted and slammed the door. Loki signaled Aunt Fafnir to bring her a meal and bring it to the door. The best way to deal with an angry woman is to let her cool down, because when the words anger and woman are combined, they transcend human nature into something else. Loki had lived 2 lifetimes without knowing how to communicate with these creatures. "Pour more. Don't let this ancestor starve." Loki took the spoon from Aunt Fafnir's hand and slowly filled a box of rice. "This girl is a good person, but like all noble young men and women, they have too good an ideal world, believing everything is under their control. He, being angry, consumes energy. I must find a way to return this benefactor to the Conqueror's fortress. This hostage is worth 300 golden dinars." For the next 7 days, the sea was calm. The 3 ships swiftly sailed across the Norwegian Sea, approaching the Shadow Feather Plain, one of the 77 provinces of Scandinavia. It was the land of the Viking kings, and the Conqueror's fortress was located on the coast of the plain. Although Emma was still angry these days, she was not a petty, yandir young woman. As a rational explorer, she knew that if it weren't for Loki, she would probably never have the chance to venture into the bowels of a great beast. Moreover, she had obtained so much first-hand information about the Great Old One, Leviathan. Even if Yam disappeared, with the journals and notes she had already recorded, she was almost certain to be the Royal Academy's chief explorer this year. Thinking of having more manpower, greater exploration privileges, and priority access to research laboratories next year, Emma chose to forgive this eccentric captain for now. Of course, if she wanted to sail to more distant continents in the future, she would need a captain as fearless as Loki. Maintaining a respectable relationship was essential for continued scientific research. For the past few days, she had practically locked herself in the cabin, organizing her notes day and night. Loki didn't bother to care, simply sending Fafnir to bring her food regularly. A warm sea breeze blew, and the outline of the Conqueror's fortress appeared before everyone's eyes. It was a fiery red castle nestled amidst the black grasslands. The Viking land of Dark Feather Plain was named after the almost eternally lush black grass. This mutant plant contained a large amount of metallic elements. Millennia ago, this land belonged to the dragon herders, a clan of giants. Animals inhabiting the black grasslands, after consuming large quantities of these metal-rich plants, became prey to the dragons. The dragon herders used this method to ensure the dragons ingested sufficient metal during their feeding, hardening their teeth and scales. Conqueror's fortress was a massive, fiery red castle. From a distance, it resembled a massive dragon, its head held high, perched on the shore. From afar, a black dragon, crashing onto its towering walls, was the castle's most dazzling emblem. Legend has it that Conqueror's fortress was built over 3,000 years by the giants of the Dragon Herders clan and human slaves. Eventually, an unknown event caused the dragon to escape the giants' control, sparking a war that lasted for centuries. The exact circumstances surrounding the Black Dragon's death on the fortress walls are now unknown. However, over the passage of thousands of years, its skin and bones had dried out, its hardened scales becoming almost fused to the fortress walls. Only the massive dragon's head, supported by its skull, remained undeformed. Before its death, the dragon crouched on the city wall, its maw gaping, and spewed flames toward the gate. In its final moments, this majestic gesture was immortalized here. Of the hunters from Hanshu village, only Old Gaur had ever entered this Viking capital. This was partly due to the towering Shyandran mountain separating the river valley from Yanayu plain, but also because the city's per capita living expenses were beyond the reach of the impoverished hunters of Hanshu village. As the boat neared shore, everyone gathered on the side of the ship. The dark red walls stretched endlessly. Besides the massive black dragon at the gate, dragon remains and bones were still preserved in many other locations. In the center of the city stood a massive castle constructed from layers of redstone. It stood at least 10 stories high. In sheer size, it was at least 20 times the size of Storm's End. Haha. Hurry up and get ashore. I need to check out the Tangren shops. I've always heard their sword cultivators can fly with their swords. I've got to see them for myself. Haha. Sword cultivators? How could any sword cultivator be as powerful as that giant bird that summons lightning? This trip, Old Gaur, has seen something truly remarkable. What sword cultivators? The real business is buying a few boxes of perfume for my wife and some Arab-made candy for my children. Returning from a raid with silver in their pockets was the happiest moment for Viking pirates. As the dock drew closer, Loki hoisted the saber-toothed royal flag, given to him by his sister, Merindin, from the bow of his ship. Hoisting this flag signified that they were distinguished guests of the O'Sullivan family, guaranteed the best service wherever they went in the city. Seeing the royal flag, the commanding clerk at the dock immediately waved a flag to signal them to stop. The ship docked in the sea, and a dozen small longboats, acting as towboats, emerged from the harbor, casting hooks and hauling the fleet to a wider dock. After Loki and his companions disembarked, a guard in crimson armor approached, followed by a carriage pulled by 8 horses. Viking Princess Merindin O'Sullivan summons Loki Sterager, Lord of Coldwater Village, and Amra Waldorf, explorer of the Royal Academy of Sciences of Constantinople, to the palace for an audience. Depart immediately. The armored guard produced a scroll in red, while the honor guard behind him raised their instruments and played them. This proclamation had a rather Tang Dynasty-style atmosphere. But then the band was clearly imitating French aristocracy. This bizarre blend of East and West made Loki shake his head repeatedly. A civilization without a history of humanistic endeavors seeking to integrate into mainstream society, if it relied solely on imitation, clearly had a long way to go. Chapter 133 Light Touch Hall. The carriage door opened, revealing an even more earthy sight. Hidden within the carriage was a small buffet. Roasted lamb legs, goulash with potatoes, braised pork knuckle, and a plate of fried rice filled the entire carriage with the aroma of food. Emma frowned, sitting in a corner with a look of disdain. Loki, sitting opposite her, clearly showed no intention of eating with his hands in the bumpy carriage. The O'Sullivan family was clearly treating Loki like a typical Viking lord. These lords, with their minds full of muscle, couldn't imagine enjoying anything more than eating meat. The journey that followed was quite awkward. Emma was clearly still resentful of Loki's decision to let Yelm go. Born into a wealthy family in Constantinople, this young woman didn't understand much about the ways of the world. She naively believed that the boy's life would be better if he followed her. But she wasn't a chosen one, and she had no idea how tempting the Sequence 2 Sun offering was to even the higher-ranking chosen ones. Never mind the Waldorf's pedigree as a commercial family, even if they were kings of Byzantium, they still didn't hold much leverage against the powerful ancient gods. Fortunately, the two weren't related, and in Loki's eyes, Emma was merely the final payment on 300 gold dinars. For Loki, after this day's separation, they would never meet again, and there was nothing to explain. The two entered the legation quarter in silence, the most exquisite area of Conqueror's fortress. The Viking king had divided the castle's exquisite gardens into several sections, featuring a Tang Dynasty glazed tile palace, an Arab fire temple, a Byzantine cathedral, and a French water garden. Scandinavia might be a barren and primitive land, But the royal palace was no less crowded with envoys from around the world than those of the great powers. The reason was simple: Conqueror's Fortress's mainstay was dispatching Viking mercenaries, receiving commissions from these financiers to fight for them. Viking mercenaries were known by different names around the world. In Constantinople, they were called the Varia Guards, in France, the Northern Horde, and in the Arab Empire, like the Slavs, they were called White Ghosts. Many royal nobles favored Viking mercenaries as personal guards. First, their single-minded faith made them resistant to influence by local religious factions and unlikely to participate in local factional disputes. Second, these mercenaries fought fearlessly, even taking pride in death. On the battlefield, their sheer bravery made them vastly superior to any other unit. Third, Vikings were generally uneducated and simple-minded. They rarely turned against their masters. Whoever feeds you as your mother was a sacred truth for these mercenaries. If you make me money, I'll fight for you. The O'Sullivan family's nearly century-long existence in Conqueror's Fortress was fueled by the wealth brought in by Viking mercenaries. Conqueror's Fortress also housed a mercenary academy. Viking farmers and hunters struggling to make ends meet could send their children to the academy to be trained as mercenaries. O'Sullivan would purchase potions for them. Once a young Viking boy became a chosen one, he would recruit the world's finest tactical instructors to train him in the most advanced combat techniques of the era. Honestly, Loki disliked this path to wealth. Selling one's own subjects, forcing them to sacrifice their lives for the sake of other lords' inexplicable feuds, was simply a form of human trafficking. Regardless of dynasty, human trafficking was a shameful act for the Chinese people. Stripped of all its trappings, the O'Sullivan family's mercenary business was essentially a blood-sucking trade. By rallying these mercenaries into an army, he could easily conquer vast swathes of territory and create a better living environment for his vassals. But he preferred to befriend these powerful nations by selling people, while he would only occasionally bully the impoverished Slavs to the east. In any way, this wasn't a heroic act. Passing through the gardens of the embassy district, the sunlight faded, and the carriage entered the gloomy gates of Wenguang. In terms of scale, the castle's outer gate resembled the massive giant ruins found in the sunken city. The carriage passed through a towering portico, at least 10 meters high. Slender Gothic columns supported the arched dome. Sunlight shone through the portico walls, revealing a faint glimpse of the mottled murals painted on the dome. The details of the mural had faded with age, and some of the paint had peeled, but a closer look revealed a vast painting of a giant battling a dragon. The mural stretched nearly 50 meters, stretching almost the entire length of the portico. Passing through the first portico, the carriage entered a spiraling, ascending curve. Gazing through the curved doorway toward the castle's outer wall, Loki spotted another massive red dragon. This one's color closely matched the massive stones of the Conqueror's Fortress. It gripped the castle's outer wall with its 2 claws and 2 sturdy hind legs, twisting its head back in a roaring expression. Unbeknownst to him, the dragon's death was frozen in time. Like the black dragon on the wall, the red dragon's hide had dried out. Illuminated by the setting sun, it resembled a bloodstone ornament hanging from the castle's outer wall. "Hey, Emma, you've seen a lot at the Royal Academy. Are there still dragons in the Western continent today, in countries like France, the Visigoths, and Byzantium, HMPH?" Emma snorted, turning her head away in anger. As a man of steel who had lived 2 lives, Loki had discovered that this stubborn straight streak didn't improve with age or experience. He truly didn't know how to handle this situation. He could only chuckle and turn back to gaze at the scenery beyond the carriage. Through the vast revolving portico, the group climbed higher and higher. Only when they reached a height of nearly 20 or 30 stories did the carriage resume its steady course. Loki finally understood why the Merlindin had sent a carriage to greet him. This journey would have taken at least half a day on foot. Finally, the carriage stopped. As the driver opened the door and lowered the footrest, Loki stepped out and was greeted by a royal garden perched high in the sky. Looking out into the distance, he could see matchbox-sized houses below, neatly arranged streets, and, beyond, ships plying the sea. The gardens were planted with meticulously manicured flowers and trees, along with marble statues of the gods of Valhalla. A majestic central axis led to a 3-story palace clad entirely in crimson. The top floor was even composed entirely of gleaming glass. An elderly butler in exquisite attire stood respectfully on the other side of the carriage, waiting. "My king, Ivar O'Sullivan, and Princess Merindin O'Sullivan, are waiting for you in the light touch hall with the other nobles. Dear guests, please follow me," I'm going out to celebrate the new year tonight, so I'll probably have to drink. There will only be 2 updates today. Chapter 134 Ever O'Sullivan. Just as Loki had imagined, the Crimson Palace atop the Conqueror's fortress was the Viking King's chambers. Entering, he was astonished to discover that even this chamber itself was vaster than Coldwater Fort. The castle's interior resembled the Louvre he had visited in his previous life, with exquisite murals, carved gold ornaments, and Tang Dynasty silk and porcelain everywhere. The castle was inhabited by beautiful maidens from around the world and servants in rich attire. The variety of clothing dazzled Loki, and he even worried about the Viking King's health. After passing through 7 or 8 distinct halls, gardens, chambers, water gardens, greenhouses, Loki and Emma were led to a bathing pool. Several maids brought him exquisite silk garments and helped him bathe. Finally, he reached the glass greenhouse on the top floor. By then, the fiery red ocean had almost completely sunk below sea level, and the crimson and purple sunset glow cast a dreamlike shadow over the glass chamber. A rather feminine voice called out, "Loki Starlag of Coldwater Village, I've been waiting for you for a long time." Loki had lived in Coldwater Village for 20 years, but had never been to Conqueror's fortress, nor had he ever met the Viking King. Rumor had it in the valley that the Viking King's nickname was Sabretooth, a descendant of the O'Sullivan family. As for other questions, such as what this man looked like and why he was called Sabretooth, no one in the valley could clearly explain. Loki had often pondered what this Viking King would look like. Would he be 9 feet tall, with a beard as thick as steel needles, like a giant surviving from ancient times? Would he be followed by a saber-toothed leopard from ancient times? However, the Ever O'Sullivan who actually stood before him didn't fit any of his mental images. He was about the same height and build as himself, with a Viking-style bun on his head and his golden beard shaved off, revealing his snow-white skin. He was no more than 20 years old. Very young. Rocky couldn't figure it out, but the first impression of the famous Sabretooth O'Sullivan on him was actually that of an exquisite eunuch. As a late-stage straight male cancer patient, what he couldn't stand most was this kind of man who wore exquisite silk, had a face full of collagen, and even had a faint scent of perfume when he moved his hands and feet. The only thing on his forehead that matched the temperament of a Viking man was probably the bone knife hanging at his waist. This bone knife was composed of a sharp white tooth. The arc of the bone knife was naturally curved, and it had an eerie beauty hanging at his waist. I wonder if this is the origin of his nickname. I've long heard of the Starlag family, descended from the blood-boiling warriors under Olaf the Conqueror. Now, only the Blood Dove clan remains, and you alone. My subjects have told me the story of how you, with only 30 Viking hunters, held off Svingwink's 500 professional soldiers. Tisk, a hero is born young. Ever O'Sullivan smiled brightly. He was undeniably a handsome man, his looks rivaling those of most women. And his demeanor wasn't the aloof, distant commander like Bernard. Leading Loki slowly through the light touch hall, he felt remarkably similar to the CEO of a listed company in his previous life. Despite his aloof presence, the CEO always exuded a warm, welcoming warmth, making his employees instinctively want to work for him. Handsome, refined, and well-mannered, this Viking King resembled a businessman more than a warrior. The sun had already slowly sunk below the sea, and the light in the light-touched hall began to fade. Maids in gauzy white robes entered the glass hall and began lighting candlesticks. Illuminated by the candlelight, the vast glass greenhouse took on a beauty unlike any seen during the day. Just then, Emma finished bathing and changing, arriving at the light-touched hall. Ever approached, gently embraced her, and whispered a few sweet nothings to her. Standing nearby, Loki felt a certain unease. He pretended to admire the sculptures and scrolls casually placed around the hall, clasping his hands together and praying that the damned girl wouldn't fabricate any more slanderous stories about him. After crossing over, he had longed countless times for a clean, luxurious, and civilized world. However, when he actually entered the Viking King's palace, he discovered that, be it the people, the decorations, or even the cool, smooth silk he wore, nothing here felt comfortable. Damn it, take him in quickly and pay me the balance. Tomorrow I'm leaving for Hanshu village. This fragrance, this androgynous old monster, I'll never see you again in my lifetime, sister, Emma exclaimed from a distance. She rushed to the door, where Ever's sister, the Viking princess Marantine O'Sullivan, gracefully approached. The warm candlelight illuminated her fair skin beneath the silk, and it momentarily stunned Loki. Marantine, with her unique aura, was the most charming woman Loki had ever met since his time traveling back in time. This was likely due to her having spent most of her childhood in Constantinople, to the point where she even now serves as Constantinople's ambassador to the Conqueror's fortress. It's often said that it takes at least 3 generations to cultivate a noble family. Loki wasn't sure what kind of business O'Sullivan's ancestors had run, but the siblings' temperament, attire, and lifestyle clearly set them apart from the uncouth, muscled men of other provinces. 2 months ago in Hanshu village, the early spring chill forced Marindin to wear a thick fur coat. The overly bulky garment completely obscured her graceful figure. Now it was midsummer. After changing into the exquisitely carved, thickly decorated Tang Dynasty clothing, a startling charm began to emanate from her every move. "Well, Miss Marindin, my mission is complete. It's getting late, so I won't disturb your rest." Loki stepped forward and issued his own dismissal. "Wait until tonight, and I'll listen carefully to your adventures." Marindin stroked Emma's hair affectionately, pleased that Loki hadn't starved her. After sending Emma away, she gracefully approached Loki. He tried his best not to glance at the silk trembling with each step, and he tried his best to hold his breath to avoid inhaling her rich, feminine fragrance. After a long time of holding his breath, he could only helplessly pull a chair over his waist. Loki's awkwardness clearly caught Marindin's attention. She put her delicate hand over her mouth and chuckled softly. The exquisite beauty's smile was like a ray of sunlight in the dark hall. Loki was embarrassed, his face flushing instantly. The understanding princess helped him sit on the chair and helped him out. Any beautiful woman has an uncanny instinct for anyone who lingers on their chest for more than a second. Sailors at sea often go 2 or 3 months without seeing a woman, so she completely understood Loki's situation. Mr. Loki, pleasing this little devil is no easy task. I never expected you to not only complete but even surpass the task I assigned you. Even I can't wait to hear your adventures. Marindin sat a meter away from Loki, the firelight flickering, the thin silk barely covering her fair skin. Loki chuckled awkwardly, stammering a few words he barely understood. Ever, standing behind him, couldn't bear to watch any more. He walked up behind him and gently patted his shoulder. "I've sent the promised gold coins to your ship. I'll also give you 10 rolls of silk as a wedding gift." Newly married? What's the point of a wedding? Oh, by the way, I even married a wife before, Duke Bernard's eldest daughter. What's her name? Ever put his lips close to Loki's ear and whispered, "My spies just reported that your wife is in the Chinese shop in the city. It seems she's having a minor conflict with one of your brothers-in-law. If I were you, I'd go check it out. Someone, show her away." Whenever put his mouth close to his ear, when the humid air hid him, Loki felt a chill run deep in his soul. He instinctively wanted to dodge, but this pervert was the Viking king after all. Even if he didn't like it, he couldn't go too far. He seemed to utter a word. What was it? Damn it, I was so nauseous I didn't hear it at all. Loki's ears only transmitted the last 2 words to his brain. Send you out. Hearing these words, Loki reflexively sat up from his chair. Fuck. I finally escaped this damn palace. I don't care whether this pervert gives me the money or not. Even if he doesn't, I want to get out of here right now. The O'Sullivan brother and sister, one a pervert, the other a seductive seductress. We can't stay here for long. Rising, Loki bowed respectfully to the two, then turned and immediately headed for the light touch hall's doors. He didn't even wait for the old butler behind him to lead the way. After a few steps, he broke into a trot, and by the end, he was practically running. Marindin stroked his white chin and looked at him with interest. Loki didn't give her a bad impression. He wasn't like those rough guys who hadn't bathed for 3 months, their big eyes only wandering over her body. He wasn't like some of the lecherous nobles, who would come up to her and show their affection whenever they got the chance. There was actually a rare trace of sincerity in the eyes of this young man. I'm very interested in what kind of wife this lovely village chief will marry. Marindin shook his bright red lips imperceptibly. Looking at his brother beside him, Eivor walked over to his sister and kissed her on the smooth forehead. My dear sister, the night is so boring, why don't we go out of town and take a look? Chapter 135, The Legendary Gambling Game, 1. He sprinted out of the light touch hall and then sprinted back to the bathhouse to retrieve his fur coat. Only then did Loki discover that his clothes had already been washed and dried. In just an hour, any remaining odors had been eliminated. Although Loki longed to find the castle maids and ask what brand of soap they used, he changed his mind and decided it would be safer to leave as soon as possible. He climbed into the carriage, but the driver whipped the horses without asking where he wanted to go. It wasn't until then that Loki finally calmed his scorching heat, letting the cool evening breeze soothe him. He hated to admit it, but Marindin was the only woman he had ever felt a lingering affection for since arriving in the other world. While she appeared experienced with men, the grace and elegance she displayed in her every gesture were far beyond the reach of the average Viking hunter or the impoverished commoner plundered from Slavic lands. This woman exuded elegance and grace, a true socialite of her time. On the other hand, Loki also knew. Although he seemed to be doing okay on the surface, he was still a long way from being the eldest princess of the O'Sullivan family. Perhaps not as far as the Earth from the sun, but still from the Earth to the moon. Forget it, forget it. This is the kind of woman I couldn't afford to support even if she fell in love with me. The evening breeze blew against his cheeks, and Loki tried his best to forget her. After this separation, I didn't know when we would meet again. Compared to women, I had more important things to attend to. I now have another 400 dinars in my vault, which is almost equivalent to 4,000 daler II silver coins. With such a large amount of construction funds for the village, the next step might be to consider hiring more workers and building more ships. Time flew by as he pondered. After an indefinite period of time, the carriage suddenly stopped. Loki lifted the curtain and looked out the window, realizing he had arrived at the commercial street outside the palace. We've arrived at Izumo Trading Company. The driver deftly lowered the floor mat and opened the door. Loki walked out, bewildered, and found the street bustling with people. Right before him stood the sign for the Tangchuan Trading Company. Seeing the familiar sign again reminded him of the powerful and reclusive Illuminati gatekeeper in Yorkshire. Although the trip to Yorkshire had made him a tidy sum, the feeling of being outmatched in combat was still unpleasant. Since he was already here, let's go in and take a look. As soon as he stepped onto the first step, a loud curse erupted from the brightly lit hall. My cheap sister, you say you're married. Instead of spending your husband's money, you're sucking the blood of my Bernard family like a borer. Do you still have any shame? What qualifications do you have to come to Conqueror's fortress and rob me of the Tang people's goods? The speaker was a lean, middle-aged man with a delicate beard. He had long golden hair and wore a long, gold-threaded robe. The axe slung across his waist was also decorated with gold and diamonds. This attire was only seen among Vikings in Conqueror's fortress, a true aristocrat among them. I haven't stolen or robbed anyone. What's your business if my father offers me support? You, on the other hand, have achieved nothing as a Viking. You haven't killed a single person in your 40 years. And all you do is hang around in Conqueror's fortress, spending the family's money. It's a true disgrace to the Bernard family to have someone like you. The one who shouted this out was, of course, Loki's long-forgotten wife, Una Bernard. She was buying silk at the Izumo Trading Company with two male companions. While loading the already paid goods onto the carriage, they were intercepted by a team led by her brother, Tiffa Bernard. This led to the scene before her. The Viking nobles were all financial backers of the Izumo Trading Company. The owner and his staff, well aware of this race's barbarity, stood aside with their heads bowed and their hands hanging. No one stepped forward to intervene, but neither side showed any sign of stopping. Even if I'm ruined, I'm still better off than your wretch who can't even support his wife. What's that guy called? Loki. Haha. How dare someone who can't even afford to support a wife share the same name as the god of wisdom in Valhalla? I wonder how much of a chuckle his father has. Tiffa's followers roared with laughter, their expressions filled with mockery. As a top-tier dandy, Tiffa might not be a martial arts expert, but when it came to street fighting, Una was no match. Una's cheeks immediately flushed. In Viking society, women held a low status. Married women often measured themselves against their husband's status. The higher their rank and the larger their territory, the more respect they received. Loki only owned Hanshu village, a village that was nothing compared to other Viking nobles. My dear, why don't you give them these 2 rolls of silk? The male concubine leaned over and whispered. This is the Izumo Trading Company, after all. It wouldn't be nice to have others laugh at you like this, and to hurt Lord Loki along with you. Haha, Lord Loki. Una sighed deeply, her heartfelt disdain for her husband once again revealed. On her wedding night, she had merely expressed her displeasure with him, but he had actually brought a group of male concubines to please her. He then disappeared for a full 2 months. Una considered herself to be giving Loki the most respect by committing herself to marrying a minor lord. She had never imagined that this country bumpkin would dare to disdain her. She saw Loki as a mere toymaker, a complete bootlicker. In the eyes of Viking women, such a man was definitely not a good match. But then, a magical scene unfolded before Yuna's eyes. A rough hand suddenly grabbed Tifa's hair and yanked her back with all its might. With a resounding thud, Tifa Bernard's entire face was pinned to the back of her head by the hand, slamming hard onto the bluestone floor. His features instantly shattered into a pool of bloody mud as he landed face first on the ground. But the sudden attack wasn't over yet. The unknown attacker behind him extended his broad foot and kicked him in the back of the head. A crisp crack echoed from the center of his skull. Tifa's nose must have shattered into a ball of bone. It all happened in a split second. The Tang Dynasty swordsman guarding the Izumo Trading Company had only just now drawn his flying sword and hurled it at the attacker. But Loki was no longer the naive overlord he once was. He swung back, unsheathed his blood axe, and slashed through the air. The sharp axe blade struck the flying sword, and the thin blade let out a wail of strain before shattering into pieces. Loki once again pulled Tifa Bernard's hair from the floor, lifted his head from the ground, and then held a bloody axe across his neck. Tonight is another dinner, and there will be 2 more chapters today. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136, The Legendary Gambling Game, 2. Loki's eyes flashed crimson as he entered combat mode. If Ivor O'Sullivan hadn't arrived at the right moment, Loki would have impulsively severed Tifa's head. Loki was no longer the youthful overlord of the previous year. Just 7 days earlier, he had dared to leap upon the Great Old One, Leviathan, in a desperate attempt. Mortals were nothing to him. His impulsive attack wasn't motivated by a desire to defend his supposed wife, nor was it inspired by someone's comments about his deceased father. In that moment, he simply wanted to crush that beautiful head with his might, nothing more. But then, a chill ran down his neck. Looking down, Loki felt a cold bone blade resting against his neck. A deep sense of mortal danger welled up from the blade, and Loki turned to see Ivor's smiling face. Izumo Trading Company is an honored guest of my conqueror's fortress. I have no business dealing with the 2 of you fighting in the river valley, but spilling blood in my conqueror's fortress is uncivilized. As the bloody scene faded, Loki let go of Tifa Bernard's hair and kicked him into a corner. Clapping his hands softly, he walked over to Yuna and said stiffly, "Go home." The 2 male companions accompanying Yuna were considered the top gigolos in Conqueror's fortress. Beating up a lord's only son in the street was unprecedented in this city. Yuna was still in shock, barely recovering from her shock. Her brother, Tifa Bernard, though a playboy, had been Duke Bernard's favorite since childhood. After all, Loki, the young lord, still had to live under his father's protection. Now that he had beaten Tifa like this, wasn't he feeling a tinge of fear? Her mind blank, Yuna mechanically followed Loki. Just as she was about to exit the Izumo Trading Company, a steady voice echoed from behind. Wait, the speaker was a tall, muscular Viking. A red skull tattoo etched upon his bald head, a wisp of hair remaining, and 2 broad-bladed hatchets pierced his back. This was the attire of a Viking berserker. Loki had met this man at his wedding with Yuna. He was Gustav Bernard, the eldest son of Duke Bernard. As a younger brother, I'm teaching my sister a lesson. This is a family affair. You, an outsider, ignorant of the situation, took the liberty of attacking one of my people. Do you really think you'll just walk away like that? Haha, Loki chuckled instead of getting angry. I'm not leaving. Do you also want a taste of my axe, men of Conqueror's fortress? I'm Loki Starager from Coldwater Village. I'm sure many of you have heard of me, Blood Axe Loki. It's a hot and humdrum summer night. Can you gather a little closer and form a human wall in the middle of the street? My brother-in-law and I will draw our axes and clash until only one man is left standing. Consider this our entertainment for the Viking King tonight. How is that? The 2 lords swung their axes in a duel, a scene the Viking warriors loved to see. Cheers erupted all around, and even the O'Sullivan siblings smiled and stepped aside to enjoy the show. Only Gustav, like his father, instinctively took a step back at the word duel. Haha, if you're scared and your balls are trembling, that's okay. I can have you and your guards come up and chop me alone. Draw your axe, and let Odin witness our life or death. Come on, Loki's fearless provocation only made Gustav even more worried. But things had progressed to this point, and he could no longer retreat. After all, this is the Conqueror's Fortress, a civilized place where my king's palace is located. Pulling out your axe and chopping in the street will make a fool of all the merchants in the shopping street. Brother Loki, if you really want to compete, how about we have a literary duel between merchants? The dispute between my brother and sister originated from a few batches of silk, and we will use these silks as the bet. As he spoke, Gustav pulled a wooden table from his side. You and I will take turns placing bets on this table. Each round, Loki, the shopkeeper of the Izumo Trading Company, will estimate the value. After 3 rounds, whoever has thrown out the highest total value of treasures will take everything on the table. What do you think? Do you dare? If you don't dare, you can also add my stepsister. Loki narrowed his eyes and looked at Gustav. His brother-in-law was clearly not as reckless as he appeared. He had perfectly inherited Duke Bernard's calculating nature. Not only had he politely declined his invitation to fight, but he had also used his own words to backfire. There was a certain ingenuity that befitted a cultured person. Alright, let's play, Loki laughed heartily, pulling up a chair and sitting across from Gustav. The old shopkeeper of the Izumo Trading Company, Luochuan Cheofen, stood between them, while O'Sullivan and his sister, Meharantine, sat at the head of the table, acting as witnesses. As everyone's eyes focused on the round table, less than a meter in diameter, only Marindin glanced imperceptibly at Yuna, standing behind Loki. Taking in Yuna's attire and slightly aged complexion, she chuckled disdainfully, her chest involuntarily puffing out. A crowd of onlookers instantly swarmed the Izumo Trading Company, surrounding the narrow hall in a tight circle. Gustav wore a mysterious smile and pulled out his first bet from his pocket. It wasn't large, a golden buckle the size of a silver coin suspended from a golden chain. Placing it on the table, Loki discovered it was a small, ingeniously crafted sundial. An obelisk-like pointer stood in the center of the buckle. When placed parallel to the table, the crystal cover on top automatically popped open, revealing the sundial hidden within, which tilted at a 45-degree angle. The white-haired old shopkeeper held the exquisite artifact before his eyes. He first examined it closely with a magnifying glass, then brought it to his nose and sniffed it. This is a solid gold sundial from France, made by the Dante Mechanical Workshop. If I'm not mistaken, it was purchased at the Dante watch shop in Paris. Although this watch is exquisite, it was only made by an apprentice in the mechanical workshop, not by the master Dante himself. It's worth 220 dinars, Loki nodded and asked the coachman beside him to bring the balance of the payment that Marindin had made to him from the carriage. When the 300 gold coins clattered onto the round table, the crowd around him erupted in a rather disheartening jeer. Brother Loki, you've probably never participated in a competition like this before. Let me explain it briefly. Marindin, sensing Loki's predicament, leaned closer to him and whispered in his ear. In this bet, all the coins must fit perfectly onto this not-so-large round table. Not even a fraction will do. After 3 rounds, the table will shrink. This is the time to test the wealth of both parties involved. If after 2 rounds, you can't produce something that can fit onto the table without rolling onto the floor, you'll be deemed to have given up. So, spilling gold coins onto the table to form a mountain is usually something the wealthy would do to make things difficult for the lesser ones. After all, not everyone can easily come up with a small, valuable artifact. Haha, Loki chuckled dryly. Do you really think I'll lose? Marindin looked at him with sparkling eyes, unsure where the lord of this small fishing village got such confidence from. Loki smiled and shook his head. He glanced at the Tang Dynasty shopkeeper beside him, reaching into his bag and touching the 10-centimeter square seal. Chapter 137, The Legendary Gambling Game, 3. A pile of gold coins spilled onto the round table, forming a precarious mountain. The remaining empty space on the table was barely enough to accommodate any large or heavy bets. Gustav smiled at Loki, already smelling victory. In the Middle Ages, there was no online shopping or live streaming. Traveling to a bustling metropolis to purchase artisan-crafted luxury goods was a life experience reserved for the upper class. The ordinary nouveau riche simply couldn't afford such luxurious social activities as travel. In this era, fulfilling one's promise required not only gold and silver but also an army to protect one. The nouveau riche possessed only gold coins. Their disadvantage in this gambling game was obvious. No matter what Gustav threw onto the table in the next round, Loki would be unable to throw in any more gold coins. There was no room left. Tilting his head in thought, Gustav summoned his female companion and removed a necklace adorned with several gemstones from the gypsy woman's smooth neck. The necklace was of a modern design. A gold chain strung pendants carved from 7 or 8 different stones, including diamonds, emeralds, jade, rubies, and obsidian. The ruby was carved into an exquisite apple, the jade into a layered rapeseed, the diamond into a soaring angel, and the obsidian into a winged gargoyle. Each tiny pendant was no bigger than a fingernail, yet incredibly lifelike and exquisite. This is the work of Mr. Simidis, the bone spirit craftsman from Paris. As a descendant of a great family from the Principality of Ramses, Mr. Simidis's craftsmanship is always astonishing. The old court official took the necklace in his hands and, after just one glance, made his assessment. Mr. Simidis only creates 3 pieces of art each year. This necklace isn't something you can buy with just money. It often requires a good deal of luck. After a moment's contemplation, the old court official placed the necklace on the mountain of gold coins. My price: 1,100 gold dinars. Upon hearing this offer, Loki, whose blood was boiling from assaulting Tifa, completely calmed down. He realized now that he had walked up to the table completely clueless. Now, his opponent had dealt their cards, and the next move was his. He fingered the imperial seal within the package, narrowing his eyes as he glanced at the Tang dynasty official standing nearby. The old man, with his white hair and youthful features, looked somewhat sage-like. But after witnessing the true face of shopkeeper Luo in Yorkshire, he knew full well what these Tang dynasty merchants concealed beneath their elaborate facades. Even if this imperial seal wasn't genuine, the fact that it was included in the obsidian pagoda meant it must be an exceptional replica. Throwing it onto the table would certainly crush anything, but what then? He was almost certain to be targeted by these Tang dynasty officials. Though the Vikings were known for their bravery and fierce fighting, the Tang people still saw them as nothing more than a group of hairy savages worshipping barbarian gods. The Tang people, on the other hand, disregarded spirits and gods, continuing to cultivate the immortal arts inherited from the pre-Kin philosophers. If they targeted him, he would be courting a formidable foe. The brightly lit hall was hushed, as the hundreds of onlookers gathered to watch held their breath. Even the O'Sullivan siblings, seated across the table, were eager to see what treasures Loki would pull out. He felt the seal within the package, savoring its smooth texture, but ultimately left the 10-centimeter square seal in the bag. A true man can bend and stretch. He could afford to lose these 300 gold coins. They were merely material possessions. But if he exposed the imperial seal and became the target of these treacherous Tang people, he would be incapable of resolving the problem with his current abilities. Seeing Loki rummaging through his bag for a long time before finally emerging empty-handed, the crowd let out another murmur of disappointment, seemingly having already anticipated the outcome of the contest. However, to everyone's surprise, just as Loki opened his mouth to concede defeat, Una beside him pulled out an exquisite wooden plaque from the pocket of her ample bra. The plaque, barely palm-sized, was composed entirely of a smooth ironwood. While seemingly unremarkable, the 2 large characters engraved upon it caused everyone to gasp. The words read, "Misty Duck." It was actually a fiefdom token. In the Middle Ages, there was no such thing as a house deed, a contract representing ownership of land and houses. However, Viking nobles held perpetual inheritance rights over their castles and towns, allowing them to pass them down to their direct descendants upon their death. This fiefdom token served as proof of this. In Scandinavia, the Viking royal family was often preoccupied with government affairs, leaving them with little time to get to know the over 30 vassals of the 6 provinces. This was largely due to the frequent small-scale battles between these vassals. Every day, every hour, old vassals would be killed and new ones would appear. Furthermore, communication in the Middle Ages was extremely slow. For this reason, the Viking royal family mostly recognized fief tokens, not lords. Entering the imperial city with a fief token automatically made the Viking king the master of that land. Therefore, in the eyes of the Viking king, a fief token represented an entire city. "Lady Starlag, are you sure you want to stake your fief?" The question came not from Tang Cheofen, but from the Viking king sitting across from him, Ivar O'Sullivan. In his memory, the ruler of Fogduck Town seemed to be a dark-skinned, sullen old man. He had no idea when Loki's wife had assumed the title of ruler. But the fief token before him was undoubtedly genuine. No, she doesn't mean that. Loki frantically waved his hands in shock. His heart pounded, and even his hands trembled slightly. He could lose many things: gold, silver, ships, the imperial seal, even a Zuinian sword. These things were merely material possessions to him. But he couldn't afford to lose the land and people of Fogduck Town. Moreover, when Una pulled the fiefdom token from her bosom, he locked eyes with Gustav, noticing a subtle flicker of excitement in his eyes. Fogduck Town was undoubtedly worth a fortune. Yet, a town had joined the gamble, and his opponent showed no sign of panic. His intuition told him that Gustav held a bigger hand. But by the time he uttered these words, it was too late. Una gritted her teeth and threw the token onto the small mountain of gold. Loki Sterrig is my husband, and I choose to stand with him. Husband and wife are birds of a feather, but when disaster strikes, they fly away separately. Furthermore, intermarriage between nobles is essentially an alliance for family gain. No marriage based on profit would be mixed with personal feelings. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Una had no need to participate in this gamble. Even if Loki lost everything, she could still sit firmly on the throne, enjoying wine and sex with men, pretending nothing had happened. But for Loki, she actually gave up her own throne? To have a wife who would follow him to the bitter end was the dream of many Vikings. The onlookers cast envious glances at Loki, but he clutched his forehead in agony. Only he knew that he had once again been cornered by this cheap wife. Across from him, Gustav burst into laughter. He stood up tremblingly and pulled out an identical badge from his pocket. Inscribed on it were 3 words, Storm's End. Chapter 138, The Legendary Gambling Game, 4. Shopkeeper Luo stroked his beard involuntarily at the sight. The Tang merchants, whose businesses spanned much of the civilized world, had their own precise calculations for calculating a city's value. Just as the old man was about to send a servant to fetch detailed maps of the Viking territory, Gustav had already thrown out the fiefdom token of Storm's End. Seeing this, the old shopkeeper waved his hand. In his view, Loki's defeat was certain. Just as ordinary people in the 21st century wouldn't carry property deeds when leaving home, ordinary Viking nobles visiting night markets wouldn't carry such important fiefdom tokens. Today, 2 cities were involved in what was supposed to be a perfectly ordinary gambling game. In his 40-plus years as shopkeeper, this was the first time he had encountered a gambling game of this magnitude. Loki's face darkened like a leaden cloud. He opened the briefcase behind him again, hesitating for a long time whether to hand over the imperial seal. After a few seconds of deliberation, he decided he had to take a gamble. The reason was simple: he couldn't afford to lose Foggy Duck. If Fogduck Town were to return to the Bernard family, he would not only lose vast tracts of land and people, but he would also have to face Una, who would be homeless. The thought of potentially having to share a room with this young lady. No way, absolutely not. He clenched the imperial seal tightly with his fingers, silently praying that the white-bearded elder was a connoisseur. Then, he gently tossed the 10-centimeter square seal onto the miniature golden mountain. Ling. The imperial seal landed steadily on the summit of the mountain. Shopkeeper Luo reached out to pick up the seal, but his half-extended hand suddenly froze in midair. His hand, always steady, hung in the air for a few seconds before beginning to tremble slightly. The old man narrowed his eyes, carefully examining the modest seal. How could this thing be so similar to the imperial seal described in ancient texts? But then again, if he hadn't been fortunate enough to have seen the meticulously copied scrolls by other court officials, shopkeeper Luo himself wouldn't have known what the treasure actually looked like. Furthermore, aside from a handful of professionally trained treasure appraisers, no one knew that the imperial seal was once broken during Wang Mang's usurpation of the Han dynasty, resulting in the loss of a corner. Even the Tang people didn't know this secret, let alone the Vikings thousands of miles away. Gustav, sitting across from Loki, remained confident. Honestly, the imperial seal wasn't a jeweled treasure. It was truly a piece of fine jade, as smooth as water. But as a veteran second-generation rich man, Gustav understood that if a Tang jade artifact showed any damage, such as a chipped corner or crack, its value would be greatly reduced. The seal was ruined by the tiny piece of gold in its corner. An ugly crack, patched with an even uglier piece of gold, it didn't look like it was worth anything at all. Haha, everyone said Loki was clever, but I didn't expect him to be such a fool. Knowing Duju would lose, most people would have thrown in a worthless piece of junk and lost the game. Unexpectedly, he threw out a barely presentable jade seal. Gustav, brimming with confidence, rested his hands behind his head, awaiting the old court official's announcement. But the result dragged on. The old court official cautiously pulled a pair of white silk gloves from his bosom and donned them, then gently lifted the jade seal. He first brought it to his nose and sniffed it. His expression changed dramatically. For a long moment, the old court official pressed his clouded eyes against the seal's outer surface, studying every single line. According to rumors among the shareholders, the head of our Chuan trading company, King Hanren, once sneaked into the imperial palace in the dead of night to explore this treasure. 2,000 years ago, a man from Chu named Bian He found a raw jade in the Bao'ai rock of Jingshan. He presented the jade to King Li of Chu. King Li's vassals dismissed it as a mere scrap of stone and ordered his left foot amputated for deceiving the emperor. When King Li died and King Wu ascended the throne, Bian He presented the jade again. King Wu's vassals reached the same conclusion and amputated his right foot. Many years later, King Wu also died and King Wen ascended the throne. Bian He wept for 3 days, embracing the jade. His tears dried and blood flowed. King Wen sent his ministers to question him, but Bian He replied, "I grieve not because of the torture I suffered, but because this treasure of heaven and earth remains unappreciated." After much deliberation, King Wen decided to open the stone himself. The stone, cherished by Bian He for his entire life, concealed the world-famous Heshi Bi. This story, recorded in the Heshi section of Hanfizi, is well known throughout the Tang dynasty. However, for those like shopkeeper Luo, who have dedicated their lives to identifying precious treasures, they consider more than just the literal meaning. Take, for example, King Hanren, the head treasurer of the Izumo Trading Company. He had a completely different understanding of the imperial seal than most. His understanding was rooted in the word reverence. True man King Gain's businesses stretched across the entire Silk Road. He had countless apprentices, and all of his managers were elite individuals selected from among the 100 million Tang people. Yet, even his most capable apprentices pale in comparison to the immortal apprentices in the Tang Emperor Li Shi's palace, skilled in identifying immortal treasures and elixirs. No matter how wealthy the common people were, they were still merely commoners. They could never compete with the imperial family. 1,200 years ago, the state of Chu was one of the 7 warring states. The advisors surrounding the Chu monarchs were undoubtedly not idle and incompetent. Since the appraisers of both monarchs claimed the stone was not jade, the stone containing the Heshi Bi was most likely not jade at all. The Heshi Bi was certainly not jade in the common sense. True man King Gain speculated that this stone was most likely a flying star that, like the outer god, had fallen from the 9th heaven to the land of the 9 provinces. Why did he believe the imperial seal on the desk of the current emperor, Emperor Dezheng of Tang, was a replica? It was precisely because, after infiltrating the palace, he discovered that the imperial seal on Li Shi's desk was nothing more than an ordinary piece of fine mutton fat jade. If the unpolished jade hidden in Bian He's arms had been this piece, not only the appraisers under the 2 kings of Chu, but even a common pawnshop owner would have recognized its value. But now, in just 3 minutes, shopkeeper Luo had concluded that the jade seal in his hands was not carved from any other jade on the market. The reason was simple: it was simply too ugly. Chapter 139, The Legendary Gambling Game, 5. The old shopkeeper was quite skilled at discerning antiques. Often, they not only drew on their extensive knowledge but also honed their understanding of the ways of the world. Imagine, someone capable of forging the imperial seal must have possessed a profound understanding of the history and culture of our celestial empire. They knew the origins of the Heshi Bi, heirloom jade, and understood that it traverses nearly the entire history of Chinese civilization, from the unification of Qin Shi Huang to the flourishing Tang dynasty. For such a valuable national treasure, antiquities dealers seeking to copy it would inevitably find the finest jade they could find, meticulously carving and polishing it to perfection. Such a piece sat on Emperor Dezheng's desk. Its craftsmanship was so impeccable. Even the gold used to replace the chip edges was perfectly filled in, an inch too much for the piece to be thicker, an inch too little for the piece to be thinner. Many of the carving techniques used didn't even exist during the Qin dynasty. But even the most sophisticated imitation is still a fake. Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching contains the ultimate truth of heaven and earth. Great perfection seems incomplete, yet its use is not exhausted. Great fullness seems empty, yet its use is endless. Great straightness seems crooked, great skill seems clumsy, and great eloquence seems mute. The implication is that the most perfect things seem imperfect, the most abundant things seem empty. The most upright things must have a crooked side, and the most brilliant eloquence is not good at speaking. The jade seal in his hand at this moment had no intention of pleasing the audience. Jade is characterized by its moisture, transparency, and vibrant color. This jade seal met none of these criteria. If it were truly jade, this turbid jade would be at best a lower second grade. Ordinary Tang peasants use this kind of jade to make bracelets for their married daughters. Merchants and scholars of more affluent backgrounds would find such turbid, mixed jade unattractive. Yet, the secret of this jade lies in its mixedness. As the old court official brought his eyes very close to the jade disc, he stared at the murky jade for a full minute. For a long minute, he stared intently at the cloud-like impurities. He discovered that they were actually flowing through the jade at an incredibly slow pace. At the same time, after holding it for a long time, he seemed to feel the jade seal in his hand as if it had a heartbeat, beating at a unique and extremely slow frequency. As if it had its own life. Luo Chuan had been a shopkeeper his entire life. He had never seen, let alone heard of, a jade with such special qualities. Recalling the legend of the Heshibi's reappearance, he felt that the strange jade seal in his hand was most likely the true imperial seal that Liu Bian lost during his escape 600 years ago. The shopkeepers of the Izumo Trading Company, after extensive training, all possessed the ability to remain calm even in the face of a collapsing mountain. So, even with his heart pounding, shopkeeper Luo kept his expression steady, not a flicker of emotion. Although every cell in his body was sending him signals, he must claim this precious jade. But at that moment, the Viking king sat less than a meter away from him. He wanted to make a move, but not now. Shopkeeper Luo continued to pretend to examine the jade seal, while covertly observing Loki and Gustav, who stood to his left and right. He knew the decision-making power in the bet lay in his hands, and he could declare either man the winner. But the question now arose, which of the two was less powerful? Which was easier to deal with? The answer was a no-brainer. A minute later, he set down the jade seal and announced that Loki, standing to his left, had won the bet. The crowd erupted in astonishment. The old shopkeeper's justification was that the jade was from the time of Nuwa mending the sky, and he boasted profusely about it. Loki chuckled. Of course, the old man dared not reveal the truth, as that would be tantamount to declaring the jade seal on Emperor Dezheng's desk a fake. Such consequences were beyond the ability of a shopkeeper like him to bear. With a chuckle, Loki lifted his briefcase and was about to sweep all the spoils from the round table into it when a large hand suddenly stopped him. What? You, a piece of shit, are you trying to go back on your word in front of the Viking king? Gustav's face flushed and paled. He knew his actions were illogical, but he had never imagined Loki possessed a treasure even more valuable than the fiefdom token of Storm's End. Storm's End was the family honor Duke Bernard had earned with a lifetime of hard work. If word spread back to the river valley that he had lost his family castle in a bet, it would become a century-long joke, retold by every Viking warrior after a feast. And he, the prodigal son, would be portrayed in songs and savagely lamented by bards. If he were in the river valley, he would have 1,000 ways to evade the bet and even seize the precious artifact from Loki's hand. But now he was in the Conqueror's fortress, his only troops at his disposal being his 10 attendants and his brother, who was mumbling in the corner, his life or death unknown. Beads of sweat rolled down his cheeks. Gustav's face flushed crimson. He had to come up with a plan within 3 seconds. In a moment of desperation, he grabbed the fiefdom token of Storm's End and dropped to his knees before her. He then held the token respectfully in both hands and said in a deep voice, I dedicate my family's castle to the honorable majesty of Earl Sullivan. May you lead the Vikings to prosperity and success. Loki was dumbfounded. He had expected this man to resort to rogue tactics, but he hadn't expected him to come up with such a bizarre scheme. Still, he had to admit, Gustav's plan, devised in 3 seconds, was quite clever. I can't cheat, but I can get the most powerful person here to help me. Gustav knew that even if ever seized the castle, he probably wouldn't cross the mountains to send troops there, because the towering sky-breaking mountain separated Dark Feather Plain from River Valley. If ever had wanted to garrison Storm's End, his troops would have had to march halfway around Scandinavia. With his roots in the Conqueror's keep, he wouldn't resort to such a folly. With a fief token in his hands, Duke Bernard would at most pay him an annual rent, and they would still be able to live in the castle and exercise their lordship rights. If the fief token fell into Loki's hands, Duke Bernard would be in dire straits. That summer, a remarkable event unfolded among the vassals of the Riverdale. After receiving the silver Loki had looted from Northumbria, Hummel Blood Pigeon, Lord of Blood Pigeon, loaded his entire army onto 10 long ships and sailed westward from the North Sea, ultimately reaching the coast of Northumbria. In just a month, utilizing the long ships' high maneuverability on the inland rivers, they plundered Northumbria from east to west. Their advance continued even after reaching neighboring Mercia. Along the way, they burned churches, murdered nobles, and looted whatever gold and silver they could, ultimately arriving in Kent, the seat of the Mercian royal city. On the outskirts of Kent, a clash erupted between 500 blood pigeon shield axemen and 2,000 English rangers. However, the Mercian cavalry were completely annihilated by the blood pigeon shield axemen. Their general, Lancelot, the Mercian king's brother, was taken hostage. Hummel's blood pigeons advanced relentlessly, reaching the walls of Mercia as King Ella the Honest. King Ella ordered the gates closed and refused to fight. However, they underestimated the Vikings' understanding of defense. Hummel built a campfire, out of range of his bows and arrows, and then cleaned and stripped Lancelot, then placed him on the fire and began to roast him. Once a slice of meat was cooked, he cut off a piece and mixed it with wine. Lancelot's miserable howls had lasted all morning. He had just lost his left leg. Allah, on the city wall, collapsed, handing over 10 chests of gold coins in exchange for his brother. Meanwhile, old Hummel finally returned home contentedly with his bounty. Gustav didn't know exactly how much Blood Pigeon Town had profited from this summer's raid, but judging by the wealth and affluence they displayed upon returning to the village, they must have made a killing. Seeing one of his vassals about to become powerful enough to threaten his position, he lost the territory token at this crucial moment. 3 of Duke Bernard's vassals would simultaneously become his enemies. Ever smiled at the token, and the crowd gathered at the Izumo Trading Company held their breath, waiting to see what he would say. Common sense dictated that the Viking king, His Majesty O'Sullivan, the ruler of Conqueror's Fortress and a trillionaire, would not play dirty. Of course, this word should be put in quotation marks, because this face has always needed to be compared with the chips. When the chips are heavy enough, face, haha. It is simply something that can be ignored. Loki looked at Eivor coldly. There are only 6 provinces in the Viking land, and each province has a castle inherited from the ancient giant era. A castle left over from prehistoric civilization is placed in front of them, and no Viking can resist this temptation. The hall was silent, and the air flowing between the few people was almost solidified. Eivor cleared his throat, and when he was about to speak, his sister Merindin beside him opened her red lips and spoke first. Mr. Gustav, are you kidding me? Chapter 140 Blood Mist, and the Viking king was a witness to this gambling game. After losing, you actually tried to lure our king into taking the winner's property. What are your intentions? A clear yet gentle voice, mingled with 5 parts anger and 4 parts contempt. Eivor tugged imperceptibly at her sleeve, but Merindin pushed him aside, picked up the fiefdom token, and handed it back to Loki. I will never allow anyone to slander the O'Sullivan family in front of our friends from the Tang Kingdom. I can consider what happened today as a result of you losing your mind at the gambling table and temporarily losing your mind. If you dare to slander my people again, the saber-toothed mercenaries from Conqueror's Fortress will chop you into pieces and throw you into the sea. Understand? Gustav's face was ashen. Leading O'Sullivan to his doom was his last resort, but he hadn't expected Merindin to have such an attitude. His face flushed and paled, and after gritting his teeth, he reached for the 2 hatchets behind him. He had one last trick up his sleeve, chop Loki down in front of everyone. But then he thought, could he possibly win? I heard this guy single-handedly slaughtered nearly 100 Viking shield axemen in the defense of Hanshu village. And seeing how he just beat Tifa and then turned back to smash the flying sword of the Tangren sword cultivator, this guy's martial arts skills are indeed quite impressive. Stalag family kid, if you know what's good for you, return the token to me tonight. Otherwise, I'll have 10,000 ways to deal with you when I return to the valley. Okay. I'll be waiting, Loki chuckled, pouring all the steaks from the round table into his animal hide backpack. Of course, he didn't return the Miss Ducktown fiefdom token to Una. Loki was a smart man, and by now he had completely calmed down, already sensing a conspiracy. First of all, no noble in his right mind would carry a property like a fiefdom token while shopping. Losing such an item would be far more troublesome than losing the property did in his previous life. Most of the fief tokens of established nobles were often buried underground, their whereabouts unknown to anyone but him. Furthermore, these 3 siblings had unexpectedly appeared at the Conqueror's Fortress simultaneously, and coincidentally, a quarrel about them had broken out right in front of him. No matter how you looked at it, it looked like a conspiracy between the three siblings to trick him. Their goal was to swindle Yuna's dowry back, haha. I'm afraid all this was already planned before her wedding. Bernard, you idiot, you really are worthy of your brain. When you realized I was difficult to control, you immediately set about recovering your investment. That's some damn precise manipulation. If I hadn't stumbled upon the imperial seal in the obsidian pyramid today, I would have fallen right into this carefully laid trap. Thinking of this, Loki looked hesitantly at Marindin, not far away. Of all the Vikings who perished, she was the only one who was definitely not part of the conspiracy. It was this Viking princess who secured his victory. He fished out the necklace, which shopkeeper Luo had valued at 1,100 gold coins, and with a gentle toss, he dropped it into Marindin's hands. With a smile and a wink, Loki took out the imperial seal and solemnly placed it in his bosom. He could feel shopkeeper Luo's venomous eyes watching him from behind. Half an hour later, on the walls of the Conqueror's fortress, he gazed out at the moonlit sea and slowly pulled out a handful of gold coins, handing them to Yuna. You're a woman, so I can't say anything. But after you got married, you conspired with my family to harm me. That's truly wrong. I've never been married. You're my first wife, and I don't want to end this marriage by throwing you off the city walls. So, take this money and find a village by the sea, nestled between the mountains. I offer you a friendly piece of advice: don't come home. I don't want to have to personally cut off your beautiful head when your father and I meet in battle. Loki knew perfectly well that the moment he won the token for Storm's End, his loose alliance with Duke Bernard had shattered. He no longer needed Yuna as a mascot. So, she had no choice but to leave her castle. Yuna had already put away most of the arrogance she had displayed before Loki. She silently accepted the gold coin and raised her eyes to the rather unfamiliar young man before her. Once, she had thought he was no match for her father. So, she faithfully carried out all her family's plans. But now, she felt that perhaps placing her bet on Loki had been the right decision. Unfortunately, it was too late. She could neither return to Storm's End nor to Miss Duck. If she returned to Storm's End, she didn't know what terrible things her father and brother would do to her. Miss Duck was Loki's territory, and he wasn't interested in her body. She had no leverage with him. This handful of gold coins was truly her only escape route. Leaving your homeland isn't a bad thing. Living in the warm confines of your family's creation will never teach you to grow. You have 20 gold coins in your hand. This money won't make your life comfortable, but it will teach you what it means to truly live. Trust me, this is much more enjoyable than sleeping with a man. Descending the city wall, Loki, having officially divorced his wife, returned to the palace carriage and headed straight for the docks. Dealing with Yuna wasn't difficult. She was no match for him. He had a far more daunting challenge to overcome. He knew the Izumo Trading Company's thugs would not let him go. Last year in Yorkshire, when he faced the powerful Tang swordsmen and the even more powerful Illuminati gatekeepers, his legs gave way, his heart filled with fear. Yet, now, though he didn't know what he was about to face, with a blood axe in hand, he held no fear. That year, he had defeated 500 professional Viking soldiers with only 30 hunters, led 4 companions into the Arctic Circle, slipping into the belly of the great old one Leviathan on a magnificent adventure, ultimately escaping with his life. Each life or death trial had tempered his mind, making it virtually impossible for him to feel any fear when facing mortals. It was nearly midnight. The royal docks, connecting the embassy district, were shrouded in darkness. Loki's Vikings had agreed to meet tomorrow morning. By now, they should still be in the tavern of the Conqueror's fortress, embracing gypsy girls and quaffing ale. In the dark night, 3 ships were anchored on the sea, looking quiet and serene. Loki waved his hand to send the coachman away and strode onto the ship. As soon as he stepped onto the deck, he saw a figure floating in the air above the sea. The bright moonlight cast a shadow on the calm sea. The sword cultivator standing in the air with his hands behind his back revealed a row of flying swords. Loki on the boat also threw away his heavy leather bag and drew the blood axe behind him. Silver light spread to the ground, and 7 flying swords spun and rose, twisting towards Loki like a metal storm. The thin blades cut through his leather clothes. A trickle of his blood fell to the deck, making a slight sigh. A blood mist rose, and Loki raised his axe and gave a cruel smile to the sword cultivator in the air. End of Volume 3. Today is a dinner party, and there will be only 2 updates. Chapter 141 The Barbarian King. For a long time, The Slavs were considered unadulterated barbarians in the nations of the Western continent. Most civilized nations defined them as savages living among wild beasts. They were unlettered, uncultured, and crudely and primitively behaved. However, Western civilization generally recognized the Slavs' exceptional fighting prowess. Living in the harsh climate and barren lands of Asia's cold regions, they have survived for thousands of years, thriving like a weed in this bitter cold land. The prophet Shemus had sat in this chilly hall for over an hour. He rubbed his cold fingers imperceptibly through his thick cotton coat, silently cursing the damnable climate for the 17th time. It was late July, the height of summer. On the streets of Southampton, beautiful girls were already wearing the light silks they normally wouldn't wear, and street vendors were selling juice mixed with ice. Yet, snowflakes were still falling from the sky over the Slavic province of Murmansk. As a holy bishop, Shemus held a high position of authority, so at least he could still wear padded clothes. The truly miserable one beside him was Lettuce. As a centurion in the Mercian navy, he wore gleaming silver armor. Barely an hour had passed since the two of them left the warm fireplace and arrived in this empty hall. His lips were already turning slightly blue from the cold. His body began to tug at his will. The tiny seams of his silver armor clashed against each other, making a creaking sound. This caught the eye of a sturdy Slavic man on the throne. He was a man of immense size. Braving the summer wind and frost, he wore only a bearskin, revealing his hard chest muscles and flat abdomen, along with his sturdy arms, which were covered in a thick layer of white, for his name was White Bear Bakenbush, the current king of the 32 Slavic tribes. "I think I understand your advice," Bakenbush said in a deep, raspy voice, permeated with danger. "2 months ago, your country was invaded by those Viking bastards. After being ridden on and peed on, you were surprised to discover that, aside from a couple of stinking coins in your pockets, you had no recourse against them. Is that so?" The words weren't pleasant, but they certainly captured the dilemma they presented. Shemus could only nod helplessly, hoping for the next words from the barbarian king. Bakenbush remained silent. He ripped off the bearskin from his chest, revealing a dense scar of knife cuts on his bare chest. People often say that southern men are homosexual, effeminate men who paint their faces with makeup. I doubt that's true, but I've observed that you're all a bunch of cowards without balls. As he spoke, Bakenbush slowly approached Shemus, staring at him with his deep blue eyes. Shemus felt a choking cold wind rushing towards him, and his shivers intensified. "I envy you, but I'm not envious of your lack of balls. I envy those Viking bastards who actually rob you in the summer. Every year, I look forward to them sending me a few more heads to stretch my legs, but they sigh. I don't know what's wrong with that old guy Odin. These Vikings have been getting weaker and weaker in recent years. They've become more and more fucking effeminate, honestly. This makes me very unhappy." Shemus paused, his lips trembling slightly. He seemed to have fundamentally misunderstood Bakenbush's understanding of the Vikings. The minds of wildlings are indeed very different from those of normal people. The sight of the Vikings plundering Mercia like locusts 2 months ago still haunted him. They killed every inhabitant along the way, looted property, and burned fields. In the end, with only 500 soldiers, they crushed Mercia's 2,000 palace guards. Compared to them, the guards were as weak as children. The honest man Elah ultimately paid 8,000 gold pounds to allow them to temporarily withdraw from their lands. In the following period, he summoned his vassals for lengthy discussions on how to defend against the Vikings, who had come across the ocean to plunder. A month later, the Mercian royal court reached a crucial conclusion: the Vikings, who had developed new shipping routes, were not something Mercia alone could handle. To completely defeat these pirates, they needed to unite all the nations that had suffered from the Vikings' scourge. "The enemy of my enemy is the most likely to become my friend." And for centuries, the Slavs, the northeasternmost region of the Western continent, had suffered the most from the Vikings' scourge. According to intelligence provided by his advisors and scholars, the Slavs themselves were not weak in combat. Their inability to effectively resist the Vikings was simply due to the fact that their factions fought independently, often with hatred for each other greater than their hatred for the Vikings themselves. After all, the Vikings only came once a year. But the surrounding Slavic raiders could never arrive without robbing their tribes, armed with beasts and machetes. Just 10 days later, the strife-ridden kingdoms of the English Isles temporarily united. Wessex dispatched Bishop Shemus of the King's Abbey, along with Captain Lettuce of the Mercian Navy, north to negotiate with the Slavic king Bakenbush about an attack on Scandinavia. The English kingdoms would be responsible for logistics such as ships and weapons, while the Slavic king Buchenbush would liaise with the various Slavic tribes and organize the troops. In short, one side would provide the money, the other the men, and the two forces would unite to strangle these vicious pirates. As Buchenbush stepped down from the splinterwood throne, a deep roar echoed from the shadows of the tent. A 3-meter-tall, pitch-black bear crawled out from a corner. Seamus instinctively rose from his cold wooden chair. Noticing his movement, the bear roared and charged at him. Seamus and Lettuce were frozen in fear by the cold, bloodthirsty intent. Before he could dodge, the chains snapped with a clang, and the bear's massive claws hovered in midair, barely a foot from their faces. Never show weakness to animals. When they charge, draw your weapons and fight them. They will see you as one of their own. If you turn and run, you'll be food. Buchenbush's voice was languid and heavy. He approached the bear and gently pulled its collar. But the black bear simply stared at him drooling. Black Claw, back off, we'll decide whether to eat them later. The bear stared at the two men with its crimson eyes for a long moment before reluctantly obeying its master's command and retreating into the shadows. You mentioned earlier that your holy lord told you that mysterious reinforcements would come from the west. The sun was about to set, but I didn't see a ghost. This long period of time made me wonder what kind of weird country could be robbed from the east to the west by these Viking bastards with only 500 people, and they almost lost their underwear to them. You still have the nerve to talk about cooperation with me. You are so weak. Why should I team up with you to fight the Vikings? If the only thing you can give me is gold coins, I will kill your people, rob your ship, and use sabers to force the sailors to drive the ship back to your sissy country called Mercia, and then kidnap your sissy king. Wouldn't I make more money? A new chapter, please give me a monthly ticket. Chapter 142 Oleg's Mission. Beads of sweat immediately formed on Himis's forehead. Before embarking on this journey, he'd considered every possible scenario. What if Buchenbush refused? If he did, would he lower the price to save the royal family some money? If he readily accepted, he'd even considered providing only a portion of the weapons and ships, leaving the rest to the Slavic king. But he'd never imagined that Buchenbush had such a plan in mind. His heart began to pound, and he couldn't help but wonder, if this scenario were to truly unfold, not only Mercia and Northumbria, but even Wessex, sheltered behind those two kingdoms, wouldn't be spared. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, Himis didn't know how to answer this question. As a prophet of the path of faith, he did possess the ability to predict the future to a certain extent. He had indeed received revelations from the Holy Lord. He'd thought it was just a casual remark, meant to be a nice touch, but he hadn't expected the Slavic king to take it seriously. The air inside once again froze to freezing point. The empty tent was silent save for the heavy breathing of the Slavic nobles. They were undoubtedly pondering the feasibility of Buchenbush's proposal. Being used as a weapon against the mighty Vikings was certainly no match for proactively attacking and plundering these fragile Englishmen. The burly Slavic nobles chatted among themselves, eager to engage. Just as they were about to draw their swords against the envoys, Himis and Lettuce, the tent door suddenly flew open. Two heavily armed Slavic patrolmen rushed into the tent, accompanied by a flurry of snow. Behind them was a wooden cart pulled by two short horses. The cart carried a figure, almost completely covered in ice and snow. They lifted him from the cart and threw him beside the fireplace, where the blazing fire instantly melted the ice from his clothes. No, no. Your Majesty, Seamus shouted immediately. Don't warm yourself by the fire immediately after freezing in winter. Clean your body with ice and snow, or you'll suffer irreversible frostbite. Haha, the Slavic royals laughed in unison. A southerner teaching them, generations of northern snow dwellers, how to withstand the cold. It was truly rare. The flame of life is extinguished by a single cold. Such a person has no right to survive in Murmansk, Buchenbush replied calmly. He took a bottle of vodka, pried open the man's cold lips, and gulped it down. The scorching alcohol hit his icy esophagus, and with a blazing fire on his back, the dying man suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of icy blood. See, isn't he back to life? Seamus was stunned by the Slavic way he approached life. A maid carried the awakened wanderer to a side hall. Soon, he was dressed in clean cotton clothes and brought back to the center of the hall. Buchenbush walked over to him, picked up the leather coat, still drenched in icicles, and sniffed it gently. A coat made from the skin of a dire wolf? That's not a common material for us Slavs. Instead, those Viking bastards across the Baltic Sea prefer to use this thin leather for summer coats. But those bastards never dare to visit my territory in the summer. I'll give you 3 minutes to explain your origins, or my black claw would love a bite of fresh human flesh." Hearing his master's call, the shadowy bear growled again and emerged from the corner. The awakened figure showed no fear. He grabbed the flagon from the Slav king's waist and gulped down several more draughts. The alcohol surged, his face flushed, and he ripped a cotton coat from his chest. "Pasha. Hey, I knew you would become the king of the Slavs." Hearing these long-lost words, Bakambush's pupils immediately constricted. Pasha was his childhood nickname, known only to his parents and a very limited number of martial arts masters. Every one of them, was long dead. Could this person be? Bakambush reached out his large hand and lifted the old man's head, carefully examining his aged face and the various slave marks on his cheeks. He searched his mind for childhood memories, trying to recall which of his masters this was. 30 years had passed, and their faces had become somewhat blurry. Master Oleg, it took a long time for Bakambush to finally reconcile the old man with one of his childhood masters. But that man was more of a hunting partner than a master. Oleg was a chosen one of the Eagle Path of the Haloran Temple. He could channel his spiritual consciousness into his pet falcon, allowing him to see everything from high above. Bakambush's memory of Oleg extended beyond his teenage years. 30 years ago, the 4-year-old Bakambush loved running after him, bow and arrow in hand. He remembered him as a man as vibrant as the strong wind on the icy plains. Yet, the man before him now looked like an old man nearing death. "Haha, Pasha. After all these years, you haven't changed." Refreshed by a few sips of strong liquor, the old man's eyes shone with a cold glint. He reached out his rough hand and touched the approaching black bear. "My dear Black Claw, it's been 30 years. You've aged too." The black bear pressed its wet nose against the old man's hair, sniffing several times. He caught a scent he had forgotten, a scent that belonged to a very close relative. It felt like the first scent he had ever smelled since entering this world. He extended his rough tongue to lick the old man's aged cheek, and Bakambush noticed that Black Claw had retracted all of his stingers. This unusual gesture immediately convinced him that the man before him was his playmate from his memories. Reaching out his hands to lift the emaciated old man, he discovered a massive waterproof canvas wrapped around his chest. In front of everyone, Oleg untied the canvas, revealing a massive map of Scandinavia. The map not only marked every castle, but also roads, forests, mineral deposits, and vassal territories. 30 years ago, while defending us, the old king was hacked in half by the axes of Viking beasts. Your fate, Pasha, was unknown, and I was taken as a slave. 30 years of slavery, not a single day passed without me thinking about how to eradicate these Viking beasts. I, along with several other chosen ones of the Temple of Hacker, endured hardships and hardship, spending 30 years thoroughly investigating the terrain, military strength, power dynamics, and combat techniques of the Viking territories. Oleg's bent back straightened. He held the map aloft in the center of the tent, his figure a giant in the firelight. These Viking beasts cross the sea to the Slavic land every year and plunder, steal our women, and steal our children. When the old king died, his whole body was chopped in two, and he was still thinking about Pasha. Don't let the Vikings take you away. Today I brought back all the information about the Vikings. And I think our passive defense situation must be changed. This autumn, when they cross the sea to the east again, I have a brand new plan. Bakambush looked at Himis hesitantly, and Himis couldn't help but put his hands together and pray to the Holy Lord Christ in the sky. The Holy Lord Christ did not abandon himself at this critical juncture. His own life, Lettuce's life, and the lives of 200 members of the delegation were finally saved this time. The oracle he gave to himself finally arrived in time at the last moment, and put together the last piece of the puzzle for the coalition forces of both sides. I have to polish the chapter carefully in the near future, and I will update it twice a day for the time being. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143, Survival of the Fittest, wishing all book friends a happy start to the Year of the Ox. 14 days later, in the Hanshu village government hall, Jerome, clad in his bishop's robes, sat in the Lord's seat, flanked by two chosen ones of the path of law. On the side of the hall, A jury of 12 ordinary Hanshu villagers watched eagerly. Before them stood a Viking hunter and a Slavic worker. "Your Excellency, yesterday, 3 lambs I was raising at home wandered into this Viking brother's yard. This morning, I woke up to find them lost, and this bastard refused to return them to me. These are lambs from my Hanshu village production brigade. They're not my personal property. He stole them from me, robbing the common property of all the villagers of Hanshu village. Haha." The Viking hunter beside him sneered. "You Slavic beast, you only said your sheep were lost, but do you know what damage they've caused me?" the Viking hunter said, pulling out an empty salt bag from behind his back. "Because you, a mindless beast, left your reins untied last night, your 3 sheep wandered into my kahuna, slipped into the kitchen, and licked up my newly bought bag of salt and the spices I had laying around. These are 2 silver coins worth of property, and I plan to use them until next spring. You're still blaming me for seizing your sheep? This half bag of salt is worth 5 lambs. I need to steal 2 more to make up for all the losses. I only let you go because they were the production team's lambs, and you bastard, come here and complain." The Viking hunter refused to give in, but the Slavic farmers, having rapidly grown in number, had become more assertive and refused to budge. Especially after Oleg successfully returned from the Baltic Sea, bringing back the 7 statues of the Temple of Hacker. Jerome, following Loki's instructions before his departure, allocated 200 silver coins to the Slavs and allowed them to freely choose a plot of land in Fogduk to build their own temple. The Slavs, now religious, felt a lord's regard for them. After just 1 summer, their former servility was completely extinguished. They were no longer slaves. Now, they too could become the chosen ones of God and contribute to the defense of their village. Haha. That's hilarious. You didn't lock the door late at night and you're blaming my lamb? Doesn't that mean your wife got slept with by someone else, and you have to blame me, old Lev? Haha. I don't care about locking the door. But you can't even keep an eye on the lamb. If your wife ever ends up in Lava's Calhoun, don't blame me for being lost in the dark. Ha ha ha. The jury erupted in laughter, as if they were watching a 2-person opera. Jerome's method of adjudicating cases was identical to that of the Inquisition in the English Isles. A jury of 12 ordinary citizens randomly selected from the city participated in the verdict. This process of universal participation in lawmaking not only allowed the people to understand the difficulties faced by the lords, but also instilled in everyone a deeper respect for the law through personal experience. Jerome, seated in the lord's chair, shook his head slightly. Even a judge couldn't settle a family dispute, and this was clearly another family matter. One party hadn't locked the door, the other hadn't kept the sheep under control, and each seemed to have their own reasons. Finally, Jerome rubbed his aching brow. Considering he still had to finish compiling the textbooks for next semester, he reluctantly picked up his gavel and tapped the table twice. Then, he pointed a finger at a plaque overhead, "Survival of the Fittest." This plaque was inscribed by Loki himself. Before leaving, he had kindly instructed Jerome not to dwell on any cases where it was difficult to determine who was right or wrong. Pointing to the plaque overhead, the villagers would naturally know how to resolve the case. As expected, upon seeing this familiar gesture, the 2 men, previously arguing fiercely in the audience, smiled knowingly and wickedly. The 12 jurors around him all let out a low, excited cry. Haha. So cool. Another good show to watch, that's right. This dreary summer, and I can't go out robbing, I'm almost suffocating. Haha. Suffocating. After 1 damn summer, even my 5-year-old son became a chosen one, and I'm still like this. Next time the village chief goes out to sea, I'll go swimming with him. The 12 jurors, either laughing or cursing, walked to a small dueling arena on the edge of the village. A large number of villagers gathered around them. The Slavs and Vikings consciously split into 2 factions, and the 2 interrogated took off their shirts, revealing their muscular bodies, and walked into the center of the sandy arena. By Odin, I invite you to witness a fair fight. As a holy bishop, Jerome always felt strange saying this, but now, as acting village chief, he was the only one who could say this. Fortunately, Holy Lord Christ did not bring down divine punishment. Both parties present here have voluntarily resolved their dispute through conviction by combat. They will fight barehanded until one of them is unable to stand. Both parties are prohibited from striking the lower body or the face. The party begging for mercy will automatically be deemed to have conceded. The loser will compensate the winner according to his will. Survival of the fittest. Let the combat begin. Ha! The Slavic farmer roared, leaping upon the Viking hunter. The Viking hunter, unwilling to be outdone, launched into a brutal fistfight across the sea sand arena. Haha, the village chief was right. Summer weather is scorching. We must make full use of the arena to let these energetic guys vent their excess energy. Otherwise, they'll just be causing trouble every day. Rubbing his aching head, Jerome tried to squeeze out of the arena, but when he turned back, he found he couldn't. Haha. Go for it. Brother Lef, hit him, Lava, you son of a bitch. The fists of that Slavic bastard are as weak as cotton. Please don't embarrass us Vikings. Odin is watching from heaven. I bet 3 copper coins on the shepherd Lef. Lef, stand up straight for me. Prove that we Slavs are not to be bullied. I bet 5 copper coins on Odin's good boy Lava. Go. Go, go, go. Jerome was like a poor sardine, tightly packed in the middle of a large group of muscular men. At this moment, he suddenly regretted that he had neglected martial arts training recently. Faced with this situation, he only had one last choice, Katya. Where are you, my lady? Katya is the security captain of Hanshu village and the first choice of Jerome when he falls into trouble. Although it is quite embarrassing for a grown man to often call his wife for rescue, once Jerome's divine power is unleashed, the flaming longsword is simply not something that mortals can match. Without it, he is an out-and-out rookie. In the past, Katya would surely descend from the sky with a dull black spear in her hand after being called out. But today, she did not show up. Good luck in the start of the Year of the Ox. Let's work hard together. Chapter 144 Katya and the Wingard, 1. 130 miles from Hanshu village lies Razor Ridge Falls. The vast expanse of the sky-breaking mountains divides the entire Scandinavian peninsula from south to north. These towering, rocky peaks are largely untouched. These mountains are home to wild animals and ancient creatures. Viking hunters mostly roam the valleys and plains surrounding the sky-breaking mountains, hunting easy prey like yaks, dire wolves, and antelope. For them, hunting is a sideline to satisfy hunger. As long as they catch prey and find meat, their efforts are not in vain. But Katya isn't content with this. After a major battle, she was promoted to Hanshu village's security captain. In this position, only the acting village chief, Jerome, can control her. However, Jerome's gentle nature makes him particularly unsuitable for dealing with his wife, who has a wolf-like personality. So, ever since the village chief, Loki, led the fleet out of Hanshu village, this Slavic woman, barely 20, has completely let herself go. Eve, Natasha, climbed the tree. The roaring waterfall drowned out her voice. She raised her spear and pointed it at a nearby tree, nearly 30 meters tall. 2 women in tight clothing behind her, hearing the command, clamped their machetes between their teeth and scrambled up the tree. Stand by the tree. The 2 slender women scrambled up the tree, surveying the surroundings. After confirming there were no signs of wild beasts, they lowered a green ribbon. Magda, let's get going, Katya called to another Viking woman. They removed their fur boots and stood barefoot beside the swiftly flowing waterfall. 2 pure white snow lotuses bloomed at the top of the waterfall. The pebbles, constantly battered by the waterfall, were as smooth as eggs. Only a woman of immense strength and minimal weight could maintain her footing on such slippery rock. The 2 women steadily ascended the waterfall, one step at a time. Along the way, they drew their knives and continuously harvested various herbs from the vines on either side of the waterfall. Before they reached the top, their briefcases were already half full. Katya was born into a mountain tribe in the Slavic Warsaw province. Nearly a century ago, her family herded mammoths for the Slavic king, making them intimately familiar with the nourishing herbs that grow in cold regions. The summer snow lotus, which grows on the cliffs, is a favorite food of the king beasts. Even ordinary beasts, consuming just a few petals, will quickly absorb the spiritual energy of this rare plant. Their bodies will grow larger, their vitality will become stronger, and even their fur color will change. Over time, they will evolve into the white race of the beasts. Of course, humans will also benefit from eating it. Katya had climbed in the wild for 2 days and 1 night, all to obtain 2 snow lotuses for her frail husband. The reason was simple: Jerome's body seemed too frail to Katya. The Slavs, whose livelihoods consisted of farming, herding, and hunting, could never imagine that on the other side of the ocean, someone could earn a living by copying books and lecturing. Sitting down to ride every day and earning respect for it, this was simply impossible in the Slavic land. In this land where if you don't work, you starve, a man like Jerome, without even 2 pounds of muscle, simply didn't exist. Katya felt she had to change this situation. To do so, she was willing to take risks. Even in midsummer, the Shyandun Mountains were still cold. The icy waters of the waterfall poured down mercilessly, washing over Katya and Magda's cheeks, making it almost impossible for them to open their eyes. She could see the cliff top not far ahead. But the closer they got, the more cautious she told herself to be. When they were about 20 meters away, they pulled out the ropes from their waists and tied them to the vines growing by the waterfall. Magda, you stay here and keep watch. Kill any beasts trying to climb up the vines. I'll make the final leg of the descent by myself. Katya said this because the only thing leading to the top of the waterfall was a slippery stone pillar. She had to cling to it while resisting the force of the waterfall to reach the summit. Now, she needed to rely on the extraordinary strength bestowed upon her by the god King Odin. Viking armies were always populated by women, as many of the deities in Valhalla, Valkyrie, Frigga, Freya, and so on, were women. As the chosen one who ascended directly to sequence 7 in the Valkyrie path, Katya's 2 months of hunting had already honed her fundamental understanding of how to wield this divine power. Clinging to the stone pillar like a snow-white python, she used all her strength to resist the force of the waterfall, leaving claw marks on the slippery stone as she stubbornly stalked upstream. This was the final leg of the descent, as long as she could make it. Not only did she harvest 2 summer snow lotuses, but beside them seemed to be clusters of fiery red crocuses. This substance is a great tonic for women suffering from insufficient ki and blood, a precious supplement that even money might not be able to buy. In the past 2 months, Katya had keenly noticed a sudden increase in the number of pregnant women in the village. Hanshu village had just survived a near-destructive disaster, and all the villagers were eager for the bright future that village chief Loki had envisioned. With the introduction of the household contract responsibility system, the workers in the production brigade burst into an unprecedented passion for work. As long as I work hard, I can become a superior person. Whether I'm a self-sufficient farmer or a traveling merchant in major cities, former serfs can live the life they desire through hard work. Once this seed of hope was planted, a fiery passion for work was immediately ignited. The baby boom was upon us. Katya saw it all, and felt anxious. Her husband was already quite old, yet despite his daily efforts, her pregnancy remained unchanged. This strong-willed woman naturally believed the problem lay with Jerome. These days, she could no longer endure sitting idle at the village sentry post. She led a unique foraging team of equally lonely women and set out into the depths of the Shyandun Mountains. Eastern European women were smaller and lighter than men, but their climbing abilities were no less impressive. Taking advantage of these advantages, Katya led her team deep into the mountains, virtually untouched for centuries. In just a few rounds, they reaped a bounty. If they could harvest the summer snow lotus and crocuses at the top of the waterfall, today would be their biggest harvest yet. The cascading water from the cliff top pounded Katya's head, creating immense resistance. The less than 10-meter climb took her a full half hour. By the time she reached the top of the waterfall, she was panting and nearly exhausted. But when she placed the 2 enormous snow lotuses and a large cluster of crocuses in her bag, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The village chief, against all odds, had bestowed upon her the position of garrison captain, and she was determined to prove to everyone she was worthy of this trust before the chief returned. Razor Ridge's altitude was nearly 1,000 meters above sea level. Even in midsummer, standing drenched at the top of the waterfall still gave her 2 chills. She turned over and was about to jump off the waterfall when Katya suddenly fell face down in the water. At the bottom of the waterfall, she saw 2 figures clad in pitch black. Chapter 145 Katya and the Wingard, 2. First, it was certain they weren't man-bears or wild boars. The sisters on guard in the treetops hadn't made a sound. This meant they were almost certainly 2 living people. Razor Hill was a mountainous region ordinary Viking hunters would never venture into. The terrain was too rugged, and there weren't many wild beasts roaming in large groups. Viking hunters were efficient predators. Their passion lay in plundering and slaughtering people with their axes. They hunted for food to support their families, not to wander the mountains. Only one type of forager could enter Razor Hill, the storm acolytes, who gathered herbs in Valhalla. Leveling up in Valhalla's 8 paths was achieved by consuming potions, and the formulas and refining methods were entirely controlled by the storm acolytes. Katya had encountered them several times while leading the Wingguards through the mountains to gather herbs, but today, they were unexpectedly confronted head-on by the storm acolytes. They were standing directly on their intended path of retreat in ancient Viking tradition. Storm acolytes are the mortal messengers of the Asgardian gods. They faithfully carry out the gods' will and are worshipped and respected by all Vikings. Ordinary hunters encountering storm acolytes in the wild always provide them with the greatest possible assistance. Even if the storm acolytes attempt to take their freshly caught prey, they usually won't object. Offending a messenger of the gods is tantamount to disrespecting the gods was a commonplace truth among medieval feudal dwellers. But Katya didn't see it that way. "Woman at the treetop, please hand over all the herbs in your bag." At this point, the storm acolytes hadn't noticed Katya yet. They only saw the sentry she had set up in the tree. "I won't say it again. We've seen the marks on the backs of your horses at the riverbank at the foot of the mountain. You are the gatherers of Coldwater Village, right? If you don't want to bear the wrath of the gods, I advise you to be sensible." The tall storm acolyte stood tall at the foot of the tree, speaking slowly but firmly. In his eyes, his willingness to say these words was a rare act of mercy. If the woman in the tree continued to push him, he wouldn't mind unsheathing his hatchet and killing her. Katya, atop the waterfall, was also observing the two storm poets beneath the tree. Then, sheltered by the rushing water, he spotted the massive herb baskets they carried, neatly stacked with snow lotus, bare bones, and snakeskins. If these herbs were taken back to Coldwater Village and brewed into a magical essence, they would be enough to ensure the safe birth of every woman. Unlike the Vikings, Katya, born in Slavic origin, had a weak sense of belonging to Valhalla. She didn't understand what Odin had appreciated in her to promote her to the rank of winged maiden, but this freely acquired power didn't instill any undue respect for the storm poets. Compared to the ethereal Valhalla, Coldwater Village was her true home. And now, she was the village's garrison captain. The village needed those herbs. Without hesitation, Katya rolled up her tongue and let out a bird call similar to pelicans. Hearing the call to action, the winged guards immediately drew their weapons and stood ready. Katya herself leaped from the top of the waterfall, swiftly soaring towards the canyon's bottom, riding the cascading water. This was the power bestowed upon her by the Winged Maiden, Sequence 7 of the Valkyrie Path. The two storm acolytes were merely Sequence 9 soldiers in Valhalla. They could never have imagined that a single encounter with a woman at Razor Hill could bring forth such a formidable being. Upon seeing Katya riding the waves, they drew their weapons and shielded themselves, but it was too late. A barrage of arrows began to rain down from all directions. Impossible. There are only 2 horses at the river below the mountain. How could you possibly have so many people? The answer to this question would never be known to the 2 of them, as Katya, emerging from the waves, had already rushed towards them, treading the stream. She carried no weapons, as she had been gathering herbs, but that did not diminish her danger in the slightest. The cascading water from the cliff top carried her forward, accelerating to terrifying speed by the time they reached the stream. Tracing the current, Katya leaped into the air, flipping and doubling over. Her long, wet legs wrapped around the storm poet's head and twisted it hard. With a crisp snap, the man fell beneath Katya's legs before he could even utter a word of plea for mercy. They've seen the mark on their mounts. Letting any of them go will bring trouble to the village. Kill them all. The 2 remaining storm acolytes barely had time to examine Katya's sleek, wet form. They could already hear the breath of death. The young girl drew the hatchet from the corpse's back and hurled it against the wind. With a dull crunch of steel cutting through bone, another storm acolyte cried out in agony as he collapsed. In a flash, the only remaining storm acolyte still standing was one, standing at the distant cliff edge. You devils. How dare you slaughter a divine messenger? Haha, after you die, I'll wait in Valhalla for the gods to avenge me. Knowing he had no chance of survival, the last storm acolyte ran to the edge of the cliff and attempted to jump off, but Katya had no intention of letting him go. Untying a soft rope from her waist, she swung it with ease. The lasso wrapped precisely around the storm acolyte's neck, dragging him up from midair in a position almost like a hanging. Katya reached out her delicate white hands, snatched the medicine basket from his back, then calmly let go. You can die, but leave your medicine for me. The 3 storm acolytes were thrown off the cliff by the female warriors of Coldwater Village. Katya wasn't afraid of their bodies being discovered. Razor Ridge at night belonged to the beasts. When the hungry beasts tasted blood, they would devour the 3 corpses to the very last drop. Haha, this trip was definitely worth it. Katya beamed at the sight of the 3 baskets of herbs. She happily embraced her 2 Slavic companions, one on each side, and kissed them both on the cheek. See what excuse my wimpy husband has for not paying his dues every night. Haha, the wing guards were all women in their 20s. Normally, they might be a bit more reserved in front of men. But when surrounded by their companions, the topics they discussed were equally poignant. Captain, I heard the previous captain of the Hanshu village garrison is still studying in Valhalla. Judging by the timeline, he should be back soon. What are you talking about? Captain Katya is the chosen one. How can she be compared to those mortals who drank potions and gambled their lives? The women, having reaped the rewards, were all beaming with smiles. Each of them was deeply grateful to Katya. If it weren't for her remarkable performance in the defense of Hanshu village, earning her the position of garrison captain, these Slavic women would have been relegated to minor tasks like cleaning, helping in the kitchen, or building the village. But after joining Katya's hunting team, these women could hunt and adventure like the men, using their strength to benefit the village. They could climb mountains, wield weapons, even commit murder and robbery, breathing the free air of the mountains to their heart's content. Everything in Hanshu village was different from the outside world. This place was a paradise for these Slavic women. Chapter 146 Loki returns. How many times have I told you? You're the garrison captain, not the hunting captain. Your job is to stand sentry and protect the village from foreign invasion, not to wander off with your sisters, bow and arrow strapped to your back. Standing in the center of the government hall, undergoing interrogation, was naturally Katya, who had just returned from a 3-day absence. She was straddling her long, white legs, chewing on a sweet apple, occasionally glancing up at Jerome. Jerome himself wasn't particularly confident, especially after seeing the precious medicinal herbs Katya and the other Slavic women had brought back. His voice gradually faded, until it was almost inaudible. If this were anyone else on trial, he could easily point to the plaque above his head that read survival of the fittest and initiate a welcome duel. But now, standing in the hall was his newlywed wife, and he didn't dare let his ancestor take the fight. All the maids and hunters in the hall suppressed their laughter as they watched this extraordinary interrogation. Jerome's brow furrowed, his face nearly deflated like a watermelon about to explode. 3 days of confinement, he said, and immediately regretted it. Confining this living beast in the cabin for 3 days left her with nowhere to vent her energy, fearing it would all be released on herself. Remembering her own aching back and even more aching penis during the first few days of her marriage, Jerome felt a chill even on the scorching summer day. 2 days, no, half a day of confinement. To serve as a warning to others, HMPH, Katya snorted haughtily, throwing away the apple core and swaying her hips as she walked out of the government hall. Jerome scratched his hair in embarrassment, his hands clutching the cross around his neck. Almighty Lord, did you send this damned woman to torture me? No, it was that devil Loki. That damn thing has been gone for over 2 months, and why hasn't he returned yet? If you don't return, these lawless chosen ones of Hanshu village will tear down the houses. At that moment, Jerome suddenly felt a deep weariness from the depths of his soul. During Loki's absence, 241 women in the village became pregnant. The treasury ballooned from 529 Slavic silver coins to 821, mostly obtained through shady means like robbing one another. The average height of the children grew by 3 centimeters, and Sophie learned to steal roosters from the kitchen to give to pregnant women. Village chief, if you don't return, I'm going to die of exhaustion on this damned lord's seat. Of course, this was just a weak roar. After a moment, he rubbed his head and continued to tap the gavel, meeting the next complainant. Perhaps the Lord in heaven had finally heard Jerome's call. That evening, after nearly 3 months, Loki's fleet arrived at the harbor of Hanshu village. Jerome breathed a sigh of relief. He thanked the Lord for not letting the damned creature perish at sea, and more than that, he thanked him for freeing him from the hell of ruling. He hadn't attended classes in ages. That evening, a grand welcome banquet was held in Hanshu village. Servants brought out plates of roast chicken, lamb, and stewed pork knuckle, and Jerome even drew out all the beer from the cellar. The Vikings who had sailed with Loki enthusiastically described the howling monsters as huge as continents they had encountered on the sea. I, old Gore, have seen more on this voyage than 3 generations of the Marish family have. Not only did I discover a new sea route, I also found gold, a Tang dynasty ship, and slew a beast as massive as an island, so huge it blocked out the sun and sky. Together with a village chief, I even created a continent. Haha, old Gore, why didn't you mention you had a son named Thor? Ha ha ha. The banquet hall erupted in laughter. Old Gar picked up his beer and continued arguing with the other villagers, their faces flushed. A few minutes later, Aunt Fafnir entered the hall, striding on a wooden leg. Behind her, 3 pirates carried a large wooden chest. When the chest landed on the dining table, the lid flew open, revealing tea, spices, fine porcelain, silk, and over 300 golden dinars from the East continent. Seeing this, Loki gently patted Sophie, who clung to him like a koala, and stood up, raising his glass. Thank you all the gods for blessing Hanshu village. Thank you God King Odin, thank you Holy Lord Christ, and of course, thank you Master Oleg, who recently joined Hanshu village. Princess Hacker and the Hydra has truly brought blessings to Hanshu village. I propose that everyone raise their glasses to celebrate the establishment of a temple in our village. The Slavic workers in the banquet hall were particularly excited. In Hanshu village, they had not only been transformed from serfs into free men, but were also allowed to build temples and gain power. This rare equality was a privilege they had not enjoyed in many, many years. Oleg silently stood up and raised his glass. I'm not good with words, but 1,000 words can suffice. Thank you, village chief, for your selfless trust in me. The completion of the temple is only the first step in a long journey. In a few days, I will set out for the sky-breaking mountains in search of suitable prey for taming. As Oleg spoke, Loki's eyes involuntarily drifted to the tall figure sitting beside him. Though the man wore only a simple wolfskin coat, his pale skin and the layer of hard, platinum gold fur on his body made him appear both powerful and dangerous. Slavic slaves were often dark and skinny. Such a strong man didn't look like a slave. Besides, this man looked so fierce and fierce. Why don't I remember such a person in the village? Who is this strong brother? I don't think I've ever seen you before. Hearing the Lord's question, the white man slowly rose from the long table. Fully standing, Loki noticed he was over 2 meters tall, towering over even most of the Vikings in the banquet hall. He rose, picked up a large mug of ale, walked over to Loki, and gently clinked his glass. My lord, you may call me White Bear Buchanbas. The man spoke Viking and broken English, but despite the thick, earthy Slavic accent, the words Buchanbas rang loud and clear in everyone's ears. Every Viking who had ever landed on the eastern shores of the Baltic Sea had heard these words. Do not attempt to approach Murmansk. There dwells a brutal Slavic king. His name is Buchanbas, a ferocious beast who has lived for centuries. A brief silence fell in the hall. As everyone looked at each other in bewilderment, a terrifying laugh suddenly erupted from behind Buchanbas. Ha ha ha. You, a brat who hasn't even grown all your hair, are Buchanbas? Then maybe I actually have a son named Thor. Ha ha ha. The hall immediately returned to a festive atmosphere. Even Loki smiled and shook his head, raising his glass and gently clinking it with the upright young man before him. Legend has it that White Bear Buchanbas stood 3 meters tall, accompanied by a black bear as big as a mountain. No one believed that the legendary Slavic king would actually visit the remote village of Hanshu. I apologize, old man. Haha, my nephew was joking. He just happened to share the same name as the Slav king. Oleg hurriedly stood up and explained awkwardly, I've been trying to get him to change his name, but this stubborn guy won't do it. Buchanbas simultaneously grinned broadly. He gently reached into the plate in front of Loki, grabbed a chicken drumstick coated in chili and cumin, and stuffed it into his mouth. The drumstick, as big as a child's arm, felt like a pitiful toy in his hands. Loki smiled and pushed the entire plate of roast chicken towards him. This slightly impolite gesture didn't offend him. On the contrary, he quite liked this sturdy, upright man. No matter who he looked at, his eyes were free of fear or intimidation. He was a natural warrior. Master Oleg, you are the abbot of the Hacker Temple. You do not need to consult me for any action. If the temple needs manpower, you may recruit it yourself. If you need silver, just ask Grand Steward Wenzov directly. Loki always gave his subordinates the greatest freedom. Oleg was clearly a master at reading people's expressions. He didn't show any flaws. As for the lawless Slavic king of Buchanbas, he knew nothing of fear. He devoured his meat with voracious gulps, constantly raising his glass to drink with the strangers around him. No one saw that a storm was about to sweep across Scandinavia. Chapter 147 The Slavic King at the Banquet. This stuff, bland and unpleasant, is so unpleasant. Speaking of strong liquor, haha, the ones brewed by those stinky fellows in the Avar Khanate, who smell like horse and sheepskin, are the best. After a few glasses of liquor and half a leg of lamb, Buchanbas had perfectly joined the Vikings around him. Speaking in his Viking dialect with a strong Slavic accent, he enthusiastically explained the brewing techniques of the steppe cavalry. They use fermented mare's milk, mixed with potatoes, barley, and some other unidentified weirdos. The result is spicy and pungent, but damn, it's intoxicating. Even an ordinary Slav would choke on one sip. The stinky fellows call this mare's milk drunken donkey. Haha, what a fitting name. Oleg looked at the Slavic king, who was enjoying himself, with some concern, and then, for the 12th time, stealthily tugged at his sleeve under the table. He had to remind his drunken leader not to dwell too much on the Avarkhanate. Because of this battle, the names of White Bear Bakambush resounded throughout the western continent. 10 years ago, the once powerful Avarkhanate on the east-west continental bridge hosted a great Khan, a Jedi. Distressed by the constant encroachment of Slavic refugees on his pastures, he led 30,000 light cavalry into an expedition against the Slavs, vowing to wipe these lawless and untamed nomads from his territory. These beasts, with no regard for national boundaries, are unworthy of being neighbors with a Jedi, the steppe wolf. Let me transform myself into the sharp blade wielded by the god monk and rid our people of these ragged Slavic scum. After a rally, all 7 great Khans of the steppe tribes came together to bid farewell to a Jedi. That day, the shamans of the 7 tribes held a grand memorial ceremony, and the morale of the 30,000 steppe cavalry soared, their cries of battle resounding through the air. On his march, a Jedi cut through more than a dozen tribes with ease, like a sword cleaving through bamboo. No Slavic tribe along the way could resist his forces for even half a day. That was until he reached the edge of Bakambush's fiefdom, Murmansk. That night, the 30,000-man army camped on the icy plains, building a fire for cooking. As darkness first fell over the land, Bakambush, riding his trademark white bear, appeared outside the cavalry battalion commander's tent with 3,000 beast-like warriors. They set fire to the horses and strolled through the blazing camp to a Jedi's tent. Bakambush slaughtered everyone and every horse he saw. By the time he stood before a Jedi, only 200 of his men remained. But a Jedi's personal guard, numbering 2,000 men, had been completely wiped out. Bakambush didn't kill him. In the blazing flames, before the entire steppe cavalry, he tore off the Han King's ears and gouged out his eyes. He removed his eyeballs and dunked them in a wine flask, then let the giant bear beside him devour his legs. I'm leaving your life to you. Do you know why? You have those Vikings to thank for becoming increasingly cowardly. These Odin-worshipping bastards are getting worse by the year. They even try to avoid me. And you, the descendants of Mungo the sky god, are quite interesting. You've inflicted so many wounds on me. I haven't felt this kind of pain in years, thank you. I hope you'll give birth to more sons when you return home, and send me a few every year. You can do it, right? As he spoke these horrifying words, Bakambush used a burning torch to singe all the wounds on the broken Khan's body, preventing him from dying from excessive blood loss. After completing all this, he mounted the giant bear, drank the mundo donkey he had looted from the tent, and staggered out of the steppe cavalry camp. That night, without even a meal, the cavalry packed their bags and retreated from Murmansk. Those with horses rode, those without ran. The 30,000-man column stretched out in a long line across the desert. In every soldier's mind, a single thought echoed: I must outrun my comrades, only by outrunning them can I survive. Upon returning to the Avar Khanate, when the deserters presented the remains of King Ajeti to the Avar Khan, the great ruler of the steppes, he turned grim and ordered his herders to retreat another 100 miles south, returning all the Slavic steppes to them. From then on, no Avar herder dared to set foot on Slavic land, so this brother also participated in the battle between the king and Ajeti Khan. Participated? Haha, I'm a beast warrior. I followed my king all the way to the face of that black-haired old man. Haha, that battle was truly magnificent. Back then, I was so powerful. My nephew, you've almost finished your wine. You have to save some for us Viking brothers, otherwise, if you drink too much, you'll swallow the village chief's entire fortune. Oleg grabbed Bakambush, who was spitting at his mouth, and stopped him from talking anymore. The upright Slav king was a powerful warrior, but he didn't understand much political intrigue. If he kept drinking at this rate, he would sooner or later reveal his identity as Bakambush. Haha, I love this village. Dealing with these happy people is so much better than staying in Murmansk and dealing with those ever-demanding Slavic nobles. Oleg's courage in bringing Bakambush to Hanshu village rested on his deep understanding of the Slavic king. He knew Backhambush didn't harbor any deep-seated hatred for the Viking raiders who annually plundered the East. Instead, he saw this opportunity as divine retribution, a chance for Princess Hacker to control the Slavic population. The Slavic lands were vast, but infertile. Without the Vikings' annual slaughter of some and pillage of others, the thriving 32 Slavic tribes would inevitably fall into even greater internal conflict and accelerate their demise. It was thanks to these Vikings that they had managed to survive in these turbulent times. But Oleg disagreed. During his time as a slave in Scandinavia, he had witnessed how the major capitalist powers of the Western continent gradually encroached upon this barbaric land. Tank people, Byzantines, Visigoths, Arabs, countless wealthy nobles, led by the O'Sullivan family, flocked to Scandinavia. They exploited the abundant Slavic slave population to establish mines, ranches, and forestry farms. They mined valuable resources and then used ships to ship these in-demand commodities from the Western continent, generating considerable profits for the O'Sullivan family. For decades, Oleg moved from slave farm to slave farm. While selling his labor, it also broadened his horizons. Land was no longer limited to growing crops and raising livestock. The vast forests, the seemingly useless rocky wastelands, and even the very people who inhabited these lands could be exchanged for gold by capitalists. If Backhambush could acquire this land, all Slavs would be freed from slavery forever. After carrying Backhambush back to Coldwater Castle, the two men first enjoyed a relaxing bath in the large bathhouse before returning to their guest rooms. Oleg's current position was the abbot of the Kakharan temple, so all his clothing, food, shelter, and transportation were of the highest standard. The high-temperature steam evaporated most of the alcohol in Backhambush's blood. He lay on a bed woven from soft fox fur, his hands behind his head. If you hadn't told me, I really couldn't imagine that there was such a paradise on the other side of the Baltic Sea where Slavs could rule the land. In this village, no one is a slave, and everyone lives together as equals. To be honest, these people make fires much better than in Murmansk. After 36 years of life, I finally opened my eyes today, haha. Oleg chuckled twice and remained silent. There's probably not another lord like Loki in all of Viking. The residents of Coldwater Village and Fogduck Town are so happy because village chief Loki doesn't save a cent, instead using all his wealth to improve people's lives. This lord is truly an oddball. He doesn't save money, doesn't play with women, and doesn't pursue power. He seems to be very attached to his territory, but he doesn't even have an army of professional soldiers under his command. I don't consider him a brilliant man. Yet, he's a crucial and indispensable part of our plan. Chapter 148 Sophie's New Life. Bang, bang, bang. Loki, finally slumbering in his own warm bed for the first time in 3 months, was startled awake by a violent knock on the door. Bleary-eyed, he opened the door and was greeted by Oleg's withered face. Master Oleg, if I'm not mistaken, the village roosters haven't even started crowing yet. What are you trying to do, village chief? I told you at the banquet yesterday that my nephew and I need to enter the sky-breaking mountains to search for wild beasts' lairs. We might need. He was halfway through his sentence when Loki raised his right hand and ruthlessly interrupted him. My dear brother, you are the abbot of the temple, in my Hanshu village. As long as you don't set the house on fire, no one can stop you no matter what you do. Even if you want to burn the house down, you can just give me a heads up. After all, you found all those statues in the temple yourself, and the wood used to build it all came from Fogduck Town. It didn't cost me a thing. Need men, food, money? Whatever you need, just ask Wenzov directly. My old friend, remember that you are king of the mountain in Fogduck Town. As long as the Slavic workers are happy, you can do whatever you want. Having given his instructions, Loki, his eyes almost closed, gently closed the door. The next morning, Oleg and Backhambush boarded a carriage, carrying a large cart of food, and left Hanshu village. No one knew where they were going. No one wanted to know, as all the senior officials in Hanshu village were preoccupied with another item. So, this is a magic sword that promises guaranteed harvests in Hanshu village, regardless of drought or flood, and guaranteed a well-stocked warehouse, Jerome asked doubtfully, gazing hesitantly at the seemingly ordinary stone sword, its carving crude enough to be described as crude. Not only him, but also Wenzov and even Katya were puzzled. Loki had excitedly summoned them to his room, and everyone thought he had found a massive gold ingot. But he ultimately pulled out a battered, crude, and unremarkable stone sword. To the Vikings, this object was less alluring than an ordinary iron sword. You don't understand. This is a divine artifact found only in the legends of the Eastern Tang dynasty. Around 3,500 years ago, the ancestor of those proud Tang people, the later Yellow Emperor, appeared. Loki, his voice dry, recounted the legend of the Zuinul sword to these blonde, blue-eyed medieval foreigners, but the more they listened, the more bewildered they became. Jerome was bewildered by Loki's frequent atheist facade. He would point to the Holy Cross, claiming it was just a piece of wood, and point to the sky above, claiming the Holy Lord Christ had never appeared. Such a man would suddenly confidently swear to a stone sword that something could change the climate. How could such a once steadfast atheist believe such a ridiculous thing? Jerome couldn't help but wonder if he had been possessed by some terrifying creature. As for Wenzoff, his concerns lay elsewhere. As the steward overseeing Hanshu village's agricultural production, Wenzoff was more of a farmer than anyone else present. As such, he understood that favorable weather and good harvests were inherently difficult to achieve. The few acres of thin land outside the village were planted with crops like wheat and corn. Wheat favored drought and sunshine, while corn preferred abundant summer rain. Growing these two crops together meant one enjoyed favorable weather, while the other was bound to suffer a poor harvest. Although the harsh environment of Scandinavia meant that both crops faltered simultaneously most years, he had never seen a bountiful harvest of both simultaneously in his 50-plus years. Loki excitedly recounted the ancient myths of the ancient Chinese nation, his mouth dry, but ultimately, he realized his efforts were largely fruitless. These medieval, golden-haired foreigners completely failed to grasp the weight of the four characters Zuinit and Yellow Emperor. In Old Gore's eyes, if this thing hadn't looked so impressive inserted between the 12 statues, he might even have thought the lizardman had mistaken the stone for a diamond. Hey, just wait and see. Tomorrow will be a sunny day, and good luck will be with me. Eventually, Loki figured it out. To the Vikings, gold was paramount. The Zuinit sword's understated appearance served as a distraction. Carrying the stone sword, he wandered the village for a while, eventually climbing to the top attic of Coldwater Keep and stabbing it into the apogee of the bell tower where Ahe the seer once kept his ravens. Thus, the Zhuan sword stood at the highest point of the village, its main body obscured by the vast expanse of Coldwater Keep's roofs, making it impossible to see without climbing to the attic. For the rest of the day, Loki attended to the affairs of Coldwater Village. His village had once again received a significant injection of funds, allowing it to embark on its next round of construction. After careful consideration, he decided to build a hospital first. Hospitals, as basic civilian facilities in towns, were not uncommon in many developed countries of the Western continent. However, medical technology had not developed at all in Scandinavia, likely due to the Vikings' terrifying tradition of long inter Valhalla after death. Of the 8 upgrade paths inherited from Valhalla, none involved medicine. Meanwhile, Viking warriors were fearless. If they fell ill or felt unwell, their first instinct was to grab their axes and charge at their enemies, dying in glorious combat. Medical care was practically non-existent. Loki believed this situation in Hanshu village had to change, and the reason was simple: the baby boom. A large-scale baby boom is typically accompanied by 2 factors. 1. The country has recently achieved an exciting achievement, which fills its residents with boundless admiration for the future. For example, the 4664 phenomenon that occurred after the Lighthouse Nation won World War II. From 1946 to 1964, the Lighthouse Nation's population increased by 76 million, accounting for 1/3 of the country at the time. Everyone got married and had children, because everyone knew that their country was a rising star too. The country has just promulgated an exciting new policy. For example, the new policy of internal reform and external opening up formulated by the Red Nation in 1978. Even with a family planning policy at the time, women in the 1970s still tried their best to contribute to their families. Hanshu Village won the defense of Hanshu Village and annexed Wuya town. This was a great achievement of the weak defeating the strong, unparalleled in the world. Fertility naturally followed. During the 3 months Loki had been at sea, he discovered a staggering 214 pregnant women. Even more alarming, these women were still working across the mountains. They received no treatment, and when they occasionally fell ill with edema, they simply recuperated at home. Within 3 months, nearly 10 women had miscarried due to improper care and strenuous exercise. The newly appointed garrison captain, Katya, observed this with concern. That's why she stopped her foraging team from entering the mountains to search for herbs and spiritual roots to replenish ki and blood, further strengthening the women's constitutions. This situation couldn't continue. So, Loki's first order was to begin construction on a hospital. While doctors might have been hard to find in the Middle Ages, a hospital at least provided these pregnant women and sick villagers with a place to get nutrition, adequate food, and rest. Furthermore, the hospital also provided a degree of isolation from infectious diseases and the panic that followed the illness. Withdrawing 100 gold coins, Loki entrusted the construction of the hospital to the newly appointed Bishop of Light, Lawrence Nightingale. His observations throughout this adventure revealed him to be a devout monk, deeply committed to the teachings of the Holy Father. He was more interested in healing the wounded than in physical combat, making him the perfect candidate to manage a hospital. After briefly finalizing the hospital's size and internal facilities, Loki left all the rest to Lawrence. As a lord, he didn't have the time to meticulously manage everything, or he would likely end up exhausted, like Zhuge at was hanging. It was late at night when he finished his government affairs. Before bed, Loki went to Sophie's room and touched her delicate face. He was amazed to find that during his time at sea, the 5-year-old's once shriveled figure had grown like bamboo shoots after rain. Her face had become rounder, and her thin arms had become plump and radiant. However, her skin was still much darker than that of other Slavic women. Sophie, when you were dark and thin, you looked like a little boy. Your old father, could still hold you. But now, after only 3 months, you've already become a bit of a grown woman. I can't hold you to sleep anymore. You sleep alone. Loki stroked Sophie's soft hair once more and left his daughter's room. Before leaving, he placed the imperial seal he had found in the Black Pyramid into Sophie's arms. Regardless of whether this toy was real or fake, Loki wouldn't sell it. Being forced to reveal this item in the Conqueror's fortress had already caused him enough trouble. The best thing to do now was to keep it low-key. It seemed a perfect gift for my daughter. After closing the door, a dim candlelight wall lamp lit the room. Sophie tossed the silk doll in her arms and fell into deep sleep, clutching the seal. Her moist, warm breath fell on the seal's surface, and the stone, once as gentle as white jade, slowly turned an orange-red. It synchronized with Sophie's heartbeat, vibrating rhythmically with the girl's breathing like a living being. Black impurities like smoke and dust flowed from Sophie's mouth and nose. It wasn't until dawn that the jade seal returned to its original form. The little girl, having risen, was crystal clear, as if she had undergone a marrow cleansing. Chapter 149 Old Gower's Deal. Not far from Sophie's room, Loki also climbed out of bed. Even though a month had passed since that fateful journey, his dreams still haunted him, haunting his terrifying escape from the beast's belly. When he woke up early this morning, rain was pouring outside. He shook his head helplessly. Now, at least one thing was certain, the Zhuge sword wouldn't adjust the weather to the Lord's will. The first boast he'd made yesterday had been broken. And the second was coming soon. He'd just received his bread, eggs, and oatmeal that morning, and before he could even invite Sophie to breakfast, Old Gower appeared at his door, carrying a heavy package. After a brief exchange of words, Loki had already understood his purpose. The same trouble he'd encountered arose with the gold artifacts he'd retrieved from the Black Pyramid. They were simply too exquisite. Whether it was the golden mask depicting a bird's face and the blazing sun, the dog-headed scepter, or the armband intricately carved with poisonous scorpions, these golden artifacts from an ancient civilization were truly rare and precious. If it were any other item, Old Gower would have melted down these useless ornaments and forged them into gold coins. But when a work of art reaches such a formidable level of sophistication, no one would be willing to melt it down. Old Gower, after all, was a half-baked blacksmith. He clearly understood the artistic achievement embodied in these 3 golden ornaments. He sat by the blazing furnace all night, unwilling to melt them down. But keeping them at home was unsafe. In desperation, he sought Loki's help. My lord, although I, Old Gower, am not well educated, I know these 3 golden ornaments would be rare treasures in the outside world. I'd rather sell them to you than to anyone else. At least this way, it won't cause any more trouble for our village. Loki frowned in thought as he sat in his lord's seat. After handing Lawrence the 100 gold coins, Hanshu village's finances were relatively sound. The lumberyard and refinery in Fogduck town had both performed well this year, and Loki still had over 300 dinars in his possession. For an ordinary Viking, this would have been a fortune, But simply exchanging 300 gold coins for the 3 ancient Egyptian artifacts in Old Gore's possession made Loki feel that Old Gore was losing out. He looked at the old man, pondering for a moment before asking, "Brother Gore, let's be frank. We've been through thick and thin together, so there's no need for the useless politeness of those southern merchants. Though we haven't known each other long, your son Sanji has been a carpenter in Hanshu village for half his life. He often said that your true ambition was to sail the seas. If that's the case, I'd like to transfer my 3-masted ship to you. I wonder if it's feasible for you." Old Gore's eyes widened at Loki's suggestion. The performance of the 3-masted ship during this voyage made all Vikings take their leader seriously. This ship was incredibly fast, and its bow blade could cut through waves. Furthermore, its design maximized every inch of space within the cabin. Despite its slightly lower carrying capacity than a tower ship, this 3-masted ship was practically designed for piracy. "Alright, boss. A 3-masted ship is fine. With a fast ship like this, my life as Old Gore has been rewarded. Haha, I used a ship to trick you into giving me these 3 treasures. If word gets out, won't people accuse me of bullying you? After all, you, Brother Gore, have made significant contributions to Hanshu village. I'll give you another 100 gold dinars as startup capital. Besides that, you can choose 20 sailors from Hanshu village. Whether they're chosen or mortal, as long as they're willing to sail with you, I won't interfere, except your son Sanji. He's a carpenter in my village, and I'll keep him to build ships." Honestly, considering the cultural value of the 3 Egyptian treasures, even with the sailors and gold, Loki's price was still low. But it was all the spare money he had available. But Old Gore, on the other side, was delighted. For him, acquiring a 3-masted ship and becoming a free pirate was already the fulfillment of his life's dream. Now, with the unexpected gift of a large sum of starting capital, his mouth was practically stretched to his ears. "Village chief, you're truly a generous leader. I calculated yesterday that even if I melted down all these items, I'd only get about 300 or 400 gold coins. With this gift, you're not only giving me a ship and people, but also gold coins. If I ever find any incredible treasures out at sea again, I'll definitely give you first priority. On the way back, I've already discussed it with that explorer chick from Constantinople. She's a wealthy sponsor, and I happen to enjoy traveling the world. Now that I have money, haha, I can just take that reckless chick to wherever she wants to go, enjoying the sights while earning money. It's a perfect opportunity." Loki smiled and nodded. In a way, Emma Waldorf, the explorer, and Old Gore, the lawless captain, were a match made in heaven. But this wasn't a bad thing for Old Gore. Collaborating with the Royal Academy of Constantinople was preferable to being a true pirate. As Old Gore excitedly left the castle with his gold coins, Loki gently picked up the 3 golden artifacts from ancient Egypt on the table. These 3 items had a history no less profound than the imperial seal. The inhabitants of the Mesopotamian region began gathering and building city-states around 5000 BC. At that time, China was still in the Stone Age era of the Yangshao culture of the Nuwa and Fuxi clans. While China was still a fragmented community of tribes, city-states had already begun to emerge within the ancient Egyptian kingdoms along the Nile. The 100-gated city of Homer's epics, Memphis, the ancient capital near the Giza pyramids, and Bubastis, the sacred city of the cat goddess Bastet, all took shape during this period known as the pre-dynastic Egypt. During the period of 5000 BC, ancient Egyptian civilization surpassed all other nations, undisputedly the foremost civilization in the human world. It was only thanks to this unprecedented catapult that such a monumental structure as the Pyramid of Khufu could appear in 2500 BC. What a remarkable time frame. 100 years after the completion of the Pyramid of Khufu, Noah began building the Ark. 600 years after its completion, Dayu tamed the floods. 1000 years after its completion, Shaodian, the father of Emperor Huangdi, was born. 2400 years after its completion, Qin Shi Huang unified the empire. Loki believed that every artifact transported by the lizard people into the Black Pyramid was a treasure. When these 3 golden artifacts were still in Old Gore's possession, he couldn't examine them because they were trophies. But now that they were his, he first picked up the golden mask and held it before his eyes for a closer examination. Chapter 150 Sophie's Origin. The mask, constructed entirely of gold, was incredibly heavy. Its front, outlined in red, black, and white, featured a series of bold, primitive lines. These lines, combined with the undulating texture of the mask's carving, formed a head that resembled a cross between a human and a bird. If I'm not mistaken, this must be Horus, the ancient Egyptian sun god. In ancient Egyptian belief, Horus represented the sun and held a high position in the hierarchy. Ancient Egyptian city-states universally revered Horus as the creator, believing that humanity originated from his tears. Loki noticed that the priestess wearing this mask had unusually narrow cheeks, almost reaching the small face typical of 21st century influencers. Judging by the lines drawn on the mask, the woman's features were remarkably delicate. Although the beak of Horus altered her facial structure, the two slender eyes of Horus still accurately portrayed feminine beauty within the lifeless mask. Haha, there's a 90% chance old Valder grabbed this thing because it could fit into his arms. The second item was the pitch-black dog-headed human scepter. This object undoubtedly came from the Temple of Anubis. Legend has it that Anubis is the messenger between the underworld and the human world. In the dream created by Yum, Loki also saw the bandaged Anubis worshipper, the Withered One from Xiaolu's expedition. Although the Egyptian Empire fell 400 years ago, this group of pagans who venerate the ancient faith still lives on, continuing to perform gruesome practices like surgery and mummification. The scepter weighs about 10 kilograms, and judging by its feel, it's likely not made entirely of gold. It might be hollow inside, or perhaps mixed with some other light metal. Reaching out to touch the scepter's smooth surface, Loki felt that the Anubis decoration on its tip seemed unusually intricate. Lifelike is insufficient to describe the carving of this dog head. Loki stroked its smooth muscles, noting that upon closer inspection, the pores of its skin were precisely sculpted. Through a slight gap at the corner of its mouth, one could see the delicate teeth and tongue, as well as the detailed carvings of its mouth. 21st century civilization might be able to achieve such detailed carving with the help of lasers, but thousands of years ago. Could this thing be a scaled-down replica of the real Anubis? After 2 adventures, Loki had a deeper offer this plane he had traveled to. In this terrifying world, the gods could do anything. Putting down the heavy scepter, he picked up the last item, the golden armband. This ornament was the most mysterious. Its mystery lay in the fact that Loki had seen it before. In the 2001 Hollywood film The Mummy, Reborn, the protagonists found this armband in a pyramid tomb. When it was attached to their son's arm, it created an illusion similar to holographic projection, triggering the subsequent story. While watching the movie, Loki clearly remembered this golden ornament. However, in his second life after traveling through time, he could never have imagined that he would actually see a life-size replica in this dimension. Picking up the scorpion bracelet and examining it carefully, Loki discovered the same problem as before. Wasn't this scorpion just as lifelike? A little too realistic. Forget the detailed leg hair and stinger, just look at the 2 tiny eyes on the top of the scorpion's head. The surroundings are filled with countless details. As everyone knows, scorpions aren't creatures with the large eyes of Carslan. For this palm-sized scorpion, its eyes are no bigger than grains of rice. Yet, the ancient Egyptian artisans were able to bring this inanimate object to life. At this point, Loki couldn't help but feel a pity for the pharaoh's robe he had destroyed in Leviathan's belly. The robe was woven entirely from gold and silver threads, the fine metal threads so finely woven that they wove line after line of lifelike hieroglyphs onto its surface. It must be a treasure. After rolling up the 3 golden objects, Loki walked around before finally deciding to put them in Sophie's room. He devoured his slightly cold breakfast in a few bites and arrived at his daughter's room. What happened next nearly made his jaw drop. The little girl, with a crystal-clear appearance, turned her head to look at Loki, extended a finger, and whispered a single syllable. Ah! Loki stared at his adopted daughter in disbelief. Since arriving in Hanshu village, she hadn't uttered a single sound. Everyone, including Loki, had assumed she was born with aphasia. But today, she could actually speak. Could this mean? Sophie, can you hear me? Loki dropped the heavy gold pieces in his hands, knelt on one knee, and spoke softly to his daughter. Ah! Sophie nodded, reaching out her chubby little hand and gently patting Loki's cheek. At that moment, Loki burst into tears. He had approached Sophie from behind countless times, shouting threats, but the little girl hadn't responded. Yet, after just one night, she had begun to hear and speak. Something truly significant must have happened last night. Loki carefully recalled his experiences, finally shifting his gaze to the imperial seal lying on the bed. The seal was no longer pure white. A smear of black had appeared in its center, like a miniature dark cloud. Pressing his eyes to the outside of the jade disc, Loki observed it with the utmost care, and he saw that the dark cloud was composed of countless tiny black runes. Each one was a seemingly ancient, unknown script. These characters moved erratically within the murky white jade, like a school of fish. The thought that this thing had once existed within his daughter's body sent a chill down Loki's spine. Half an hour later, Loki urgently summoned several servants, Viking hunters, and the holy bishop monks from Hanshu village. A group of people gathered around Sophie, using baby sign language to communicate their guesses to one another. By nightfall, Loki had already pieced together a true picture of the situation, relying on the limited information he had and a lot of imagination to fill in the gaps. It all started last year, when Sophie was abducted from a Slavic village by hunters from Hanshu village. I caught some fish at work, and there's another chapter tonight. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.